So good evening. It is after 6 o'clock, so we are going to get the meeting started. So those that are signing in, just continue to sign in. And obviously, we will be a full house tonight, so we will get going. So I would like to call the Planning and Economic Development Committee meeting of May 13th, 2019 to order. My name is Paul McPherson, and I will be the chair for this evening's committee meeting. I'd like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given by the clerk, who is here. Trish, wave. If assistance is required, please see the clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, the Town of Lincoln Committee and council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. So if you want to view any of our meetings, you can go to YouTube and find them there. I would like to thank the public, all of you, for attending the meeting this evening, and I just want to remind everyone of our rules of engagement, to please be respectful while others are speaking, and to please refrain from clapping, yelling, hooting and hollering. Delegations will have 5 minutes to speak and are asked to stay focused on the agenda item. And I would ask that you please silence all cellular devices. This evening, we do have a full council. To my far left, we have Councilors Reimer and Timmers from Ward 4. We have Councilor Michaluk, who I share Ward 3 with. We have Mayor Easton. Also to my immediate left, we have our Chief Administrative Officer, Mike Kirkopoulos. To the far right, we have Councilors Russell and Regima from Ward 1. And closest to me, we have Councilors Brunei and Pachariva from Ward 2. All across the back row, we have staff in attendance. I don't see anybody up in the audience, but we have all of our planning, ECDev, communications, the fire chief, all in attendance tonight. Are there any declarations of interest? Mary Easton, you have, let me put you on. Mary Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a declaration of interest. However, I will need to leave the meeting at 8 p.m. I want to state that publicly because this is a full house with people that are obviously very interested in this subject, but there is a meeting regarding West Lincoln Hospital tonight, and I feel the need to be there, so I will be leaving at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Councilor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I'm declaring a conflict of interest with regard to 4.1 PD-30-19, official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application by 1254349 Ontario Inc. My family business does contract work for them.
Very good, thank you. And Councilor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Declaring interest on item 8.3, PD-35-19. I'm a friend of the applicant.
Thank you very much. So this evening we have 2 public meetings. The purpose of the public meeting is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application by 1254349 Ontario Inc. and amendments to zoning bylaw for seasonal tents. Please be advised, Section 1715 and 3412 of the Planning Act require that before an official plan amendment and passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least 1 public hearing for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendments. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Lincoln before the application is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of Town Council to the local planning appeal tribunal. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report, published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and/or the minutes of the public meeting, and made part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may also be used to serve notice of a local planning appeal tribunal meeting. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, RSO 1990, CM 56. We stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the application, and council will take any comments received into account in their consideration of these items. There is an attendance list by the door, which we would ask all present to sign if they wish to be notified of council's decision. Members of the public are reminded to give their name and address when they speak. If approved by council, a notice of the items passing will be circulated with an appeal period. Our first public hearing is for the purpose of the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application by 1254349 Ontario Inc. We have 2 delegations registered this evening with respect to this public hearing. Please note that each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. So Craig Rowe from Upper Canada Consultants, speaking to item PD 3019, official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications by 1254349 Ontario Inc. Mr. Rowe, please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of council and staff and everyone else in attendance. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. I'm going to do my best to be brief with this and keep within our 5 minutes, but just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of the project that we're proposing and those amendments, as well as the rationale behind them, and then provide a little bit of context about the open house that we had a couple of weeks ago here at the town of Lincoln. So with me tonight as well is the architect, Mr. Harold Enslin. See it over to my left, with MZE Architects from St. Catharines, and Ms. Julia Salvini, our transportation engineer from Salvini Consulting. So from a contextual point of view, this is a site, this is 3998 Victoria Avenue. Currently existing on site, I have some photographs to share with you, is an existing 4-unit apartment building, a barn, a garage, and another small accessory dwelling. The area that's shaded in red is the existing 4-unit apartment building, which is, through these applications, will be retained and continue its function as a small apartment building. The site has frontage on Victoria Avenue. It lies north of Rittenhouse Road. To the west is the Cherry Hill development, and then Menno Street, there we go, is just over here. So we took some photographs back in the fall just to give you a little bit of a better context. So this is the existing 4-unit apartment building, again, which is to be retained. This is the existing garage that's up against the church to the south. This building is slated to be demolished. As you can see here, this is the other small accessory dwelling, and then the barn in the back. Both of these structures are also to be demolished to make way for our proposed development of the apartment building. And then here's just a more general picture of the area where the building is going to generally be situated in. So the governing policies and bylaws that pertain to this development is we again are faced with a little bit of difference between the official plan and the zoning bylaw on this property. So in the town official plan, we're designated as medium density residential, which has a firm wording that it caps height at 3 stories. There's no metric measurement that goes with it, just simply 3 stories, and a maximum density of 60 units per hectare. The existing zoning that we have on the site is an RM1, which doesn't allow for apartment buildings, and it doesn't have a limit on density. In our opinion, to go forward, we should go for an RM2 zoning, which allows apartment buildings, which is consistent with the official plan. That allows for a 13-meter building height, as well as a maximum density of 80 units per hectare allowed. So in summary, although the official plan prescribes an apartment building as being appropriate for the site, we don't yet have the zoning in place. As part of this, we're proceeding with an RM2 zoning, but because we designed to that RM2 zoning, it's also triggered the need for an official plan amendment. So the official plan amendment is to permit a 4-story residential apartment building instead of 3 stories. It's coming in at approximately 12.75 meters, which is under the maximum requirement in that RM2 zoning we're looking after, and to allow a density of 82 units per hectare instead of the required 60 in the official plan. Our zoning bylaw amendment is to go from the existing RM1 zone to an RM2. It's to permit the apartment buildings consistent with the official plan, as well as some site-specific requirements for lot frontage, lot area per unit, density, and interior yard setback. So there are some handouts that are provided. It's a copy of the site plan. You'll see in the yellow highlights, those are the site-specific areas that we're asking for the relief. One is triggered by the construction of the new apartment building, and the rest that relate to the small apartment building are triggered by the need to retain that with reduced frontages, and then those setbacks are as existing currently. This development is also going to be subject to site plan approval, and the zoning has been set up in anticipation of a future consent to create that existing apartment building as a separate property with its own parking. So this is just for the benefit of the gallery. These are the areas we're talking about in terms of our setbacks. So our overall density, you see the stars on top of the apartment building. That's just to indicate that we have requirements we're asking for relief from. That being, instead of 80 units per hectare in the zoning, we're asking for 82 units per hectare. In terms of how we need to provide 125 square meters per every unit. So at 45, with our site design, it's come out to 120, which we consider very minor. For interfaces with adjacent R1 and R2 development, there's a larger setback required. So this interior yard setback, we're asking for 8 instead of the prescribed 12. And then out front, we have a lot frontage, because we're doing the severance along this line here. We end up with frontages that aren't 30 meters, so we're asking for relief for those respectively. The existing front of the building here for the existing apartment is 0.2 meters from the roadway currently, and then an existing interior yard setback of about 3.6 meters. So as proposed, we're proposing a 4-story, about 12.75 meter apartment building with 48 units. The architect, again, is here to speak to any design questions you may have about the building. We have 26 one-bedrooms are going to be provided within this, as well as 22 two-bedrooms. So we provide copies of these elevations as well as some other renderings. We had an open house here at the town on April 30th. We had 13 persons that signed in for that event, but it appeared like there were more folks in attendance that evening. So we did a bit of a Q&A session. We were a little tight for space, so we kind of turned around and we allowed everyone to sit down and ask their questions of staff and of myself on behalf of the applicant. Some of the comments that were provided dealt with how stormwater management is going to be dealt with on site, height and shadow concerns, parking, the fire route access, concerns about traffic, changes in property values, lighting impacts, overlook, and then will it be a rental building or a condominium building? So we provided a little bit of contextual diagrams, and we're hoping that we can use these as you ask questions of ourselves and the architect and the transportation consultant. But we provide an angular plane diagram, and the purpose of this is to demonstrate setbacks and overlooks specifically as it relates to the clubhouse with Cherry Hill. As we're demonstrating here, there are no perceived overlook issues with it. Upon inspection, kind of looking over the fence, there's just a sidewalk and what appears to be an AC unit. It's not an outdoor amenity area, so we would consider there to be little to no overlook impact there. We've also provided hard copies of the shadow diagram. I know that when you talk about apartment buildings, you have to be very careful about where you place them. Throughout the years, you can have significant shadow impacts on developments that have been there long before you were. By placing the building down in the southwest corner of the building, we felt it was the best way to mitigate these impacts on existing development. And as you leaf through those diagrams, you'll note that the only real impacts are in the winter months, specifically on the clubhouse building. However, in the current configuration of the site, there's also a shadow impact that's being generated by that building on adjacent development. So we feel there's no net increase in any negative impact. So, and then there's the summer months as well, when the sun's overhead, no impact on adjacent developments, and specifically no impact on the pool that's part of the clubhouse of the adjacent development.
So, Mr. Rowe, are you wrapping up?
This
Are
is my
you
last
clo-
slide, sir.
Okay, good.
And then we felt it's really important to demonstrate the value of the investment that's being brought to the community. So although our client is moving forward with a project he's excited about, and he'd like to, generate a beautiful development in Lincoln, there's also a net benefit to the town that comes with this, specifically in the form of development charges. So when it's all said and done, between the town and the region, we're looking at over $1 million of payable development charges on here that can be used to improve infrastructure, roads, or other programming in the town or region. So that's development paying for development going forward.
Okay, thank you. And stay right there if
Experts up, would that be acceptable?
if we have questions that they need to answer, you can bring them up.
Great, thank you.
So I'm going to put it over to council. Are there any questions from council on this presentation? Mary Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Neeson, for your presentation. I understand well that this is early days. However, I want to make a comment, ask you a question, and make a comment about the design. The CIP for Vineland was not specific. In fact, it said that there was not a particular architectural feature that one would use to describe Vineland. However, I would ask what you have in mind with a building as modern-looking as this one, given the age of this community and the availability of information. There may not be one design, but there certainly is an eclectic mix of some very beautiful homes in the Vineland and Vineland Station area. What did you have in mind when you chose this, and what can we expect in terms of some consideration as we go along?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll defer that to our architect to speak to the design.
My name is Harold Enslin. I'm with McDonald Zuber Ensign Architects of St. Catharines, pardon me. This is, as mentioned, this is a first stab at the design of the building, and what it's representing is a volume, building height, and some ideas about materials. You're quite right, it's a modern-looking building. The main element at the center at the front represents where the elevator lobbies are on the various floors. So that is glass into the center of the building to provide daylight where the elevators are. So the idea is to make that a focus point of the building, to be clear where the front of the building is, where the entrance is. The ends of the building also have curtain wall or glass that goes all the way up for the corridors and stairwells. Again, our goal is to bring light into the building as much as possible. A lot of apartment buildings are dark buildings, so we wanted to make it as open and inviting as possible. The top of the building, because it is a four-story building, we used a lighter color to bring the scale of the building down. You'll see the white at the top. The bottom is brick. The upper part is stucco. And then we have a wood emphasis, which you see in the soffit, the cornice, and around the front entrance. So, as mentioned, it is a first stab at a building volume, building area, unit mix, and unit numbers. In addition, of course, there are balconies, which have glass balcony guards. You can see them on the elevation as well. We take direction from our client and from the community in terms of design input, so we'd be happy to receive ideas if there are suggestions about how the building could be perceived to be more in keeping with the character of Vineland. That would be welcome.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to have anything more to say except to leave you with, I think, a very strong thought that this is the first development now that's coming forward for Vineland, and I believe that we should set a standard here that the community are going to be satisfied with. This is a big change for everyone, and I believe when it's all said and done that the design feature is what everybody's going to be living with every day. You know, the builder builds a good product, we know that, and has concern and regard for the communities that he builds in. So I think we need to start out with the idea that some research needs to be done I would certainly like to encourage that, Mr. Chairman, because we do need we need apartment buildings, and we need this mix of livable spaces, because there's very few places for people to live in the community, and we don't want to see particularly people in their later years having to move out, which has been the case in the past. So I'll leave that with you, and I hope to see something different. If this goes along, I hope to see something different in the future. And there are certainly lots of resources in the community that can be tapped to look for some of those ideas. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the delegation. Just looking at the comments provided in the April 30th meeting. Some of those are beyond your control, but was there anything in the feedback that was provided that caused you to make any changes to your plans?
At first glance, no. I mean, we're certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. At first glance, no. We felt that the open house was actually went quite well in terms of being able to convey some clarifications on a lot of these matters. So with stormwater management, with the help of staff, as well as, you know, demonstrating how we're going to manage those flows on site. There's not going to be an adverse impact on adjacent property. We brought draft copies of those shadow analysis to share with everyone there, so they could realize, you know, if they were going to be impacted or not, which we've strived to not have that impact. The parking meeting the zoning requirement, the fire route access has been designed in accordance with the building code. The traffic, there were some questions about it, but a lot of it is based on the day-to-day experience of the area residents, and we're not qualified to speak on their day-to-day experiences with that traffic. The change in property values is, again, a bit of a question that's outside of the planning realm. Lighting impacts, we've indicated that we're subject to site plan approval, and we'll be submitting a photometric plan to ensure that there's no light spillage onto adjacent properties. The overlook, the angular plane drawing's been included with that, as well as the shadow impact. And then the rental versus condominium is something that our client's still focused on. It very well could be a condominium that is rented. We just haven't made a decision on tenure. A lot of the detailed design questions and the feedback we're hoping to get this evening is going to inform that site plan process. So that would be likely where we'd see changes. But the current layout, we worked very hard to make sure that we could accommodate the parking and make something that had little to no negative impact on adjacent development, and to move that building or change anything at this point, in our opinion, may have adverse impacts.
Okay. One more follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Was there any consideration into making the design fit the current medium density zoning for 3-story?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our direction was to go for a 48-unit building, which makes the project cost-effective. That being said, we could theoretically build a 3-story building at the same height. We still need that RM2 zoning, but the 48 units does make it cost effective, and we felt that because the parking was provided on site, that it's still an appropriate use of the land, and that the additional density is of benefit to the municipality. There's very limited sites that are available to do a development such as this, so we'd want to ensure that we maximize the density. And based on some of our preliminary transportation analysis and planning review, we felt that it was indeed an appropriate site.
Thank you.
Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenters. Just, it's an interesting building, certainly unique. Is there any other structures or buildings that are similar to this in nature in the Niagara area that, say, a person like myself could drive by and see, just to get an idea of what it could possibly look like?
Drive towards Grimsby, there are quite a few buildings on the other side, the north side of the QEW. There's huge amount of housing development there of the kind of modern aesthetic that we're promoting there. In St. Catharines, we've just finished a 5-story, 85-unit building, which is in scale similar to this. It's a floor taller. And we've done a number of other buildings in St. Catharines. If you would like a list, I can certainly provide you addresses to go look at. The one in St. Catharines is having its official opening on the 24th of May. It's just being turned over to Niagara Regional Housing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'd be interested in that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Our next delegation, Randy and Susan Mawhinney, Speaking to item PD-30-19, official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications by 1254349 Ontario Inc. Randy and Susan, if you would come forward. Randy, or solo? Okay. Floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, staff and council, my name is Randy Mawhinney. I live at 4016 Victoria Avenue with my wife Susan. Oh, who's going to join me after all? And our son Braden, our youngest son. I'm speaking on our behalf and as well for my mom, Irene. She lives at 4014 Victoria Avenue. Our properties, our backyards, both encompass the...
Nobody back here can hear.
Okay, thank you, yeah.
Turn up the volume, please, or speak up.
Just closer to the mic, maybe,
Okay,
Randy.
thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Our two properties, mom's and ours, both span the north boundary of this particular property that's in question right now. We've already found ourselves in this position, we as our family, first with Heritage Village when the construction of the manors removed a drainage tile system and flooded our orchard to about 3 feet. The municipality at that time, when I contacted them, was not at all helpful, and I had to rectify the problem myself. Next up, our next experience was with Cherry Hill Gardens, the development that the municipality really didn't want, and they made it clear to us that if we didn't cooperate with the applicant, that the development wouldn't proceed. What they didn't tell us was that the province could overrule their decision. So instead, we created a document that provided a solution to the many and various needs for the developer, and for our efforts, we received a $30,000 legal fee. And no, we didn't get any help from the municipality on that either. Consequently, these experiences have left us with a bit of a lack of confidence in the ability of the municipality to protect residents, but I'm still trying to keep an open mind. The property in question tonight is in the urban boundary, and zoning has permitted a number of housing types. The applicant is requesting a number of concessions in the way of height, setback, density, and so on. And I apologize, I couldn't make it to the public meeting. It wasn't at a time that people who have jobs could make it to. So if I'm repeating some of this stuff, I apologize. The bulk of the impact, the result of these concessions will be borne primarily by the immediate neighboring properties in one way, shape, or form, not by the municipality at large, which ironically would be the secondary beneficiary. The developer will be the primary. Sue and I have discussed this proposal at length, and we've come to the conclusion that Vineland is short in this type of housing. There's no doubt about it. We've had friends that couldn't maintain their home anymore. They didn't need to move into a care facility yet, so they had to move out of town because there were no available apartments. There was nowhere for them to go. So if this building is built to 3 stories, we're prepared to support the application. If it's going to be any more than 3 stories, then we're opposed. But regardless of whatever type of building is done, there's a number of issues that need to be addressed, and I noticed some of them are on the overhead here, and I, again, apologize, but I wasn't at that meeting. One of them is drainage. There's got to be 3 or 4 meters of grade between Rittenhouse Road and our backyard, which is north of Rittenhouse, and I want to make it clear that whatever type of development happens, that we're not flooded with every rainfall. The northeast corner of this property, the applicant's property, is already a swamp, so this issue needs to be corrected as part of the site plan. Elevations. Looking at other recent development in Vineland, it's easy to imagine that this proposed building will be well above grade even before the additional floors are added. And we'd like to know how the difference in elevation between their finished grades and neighboring existing grades are going to be blended. Lighting, I saw that one up there as well. This is something we've had some experience with already. If a parking lot is constructed as per the drawings, then we respectfully request that all lighting be erected on the perimeter and shone in toward the building, as well as all lighting on the building should be shaded so that it doesn't extend beyond the property lines. We don't need our backyard and our house lit up all night long by off-site illumination. Privacy and security. Putting a parking lot in the rear yard of 4 or more of the neighboring properties is making them open to the general public, thereby eradicating any current privacy and safety, and I personally think that's unacceptable. Speaking for my mom and ourselves, we'd like the municipality to make it a condition that a 10-foot fence be erected anywhere our properties meet the applicants. Cherry Hill has already done so between their outdoor pool and our property at 4018 Victoria Avenue. And this fence can be on the same north boundary that runs east and west as the existing fence. Some greenscaping would be nice on their side. As I mentioned earlier, this applicant's asking for considerable concessions, so I would expect that staff and council will respect the existing neighbor's quality of life, and in doing so, maybe protect them from having to compromise it in too much of a way. That's all I've got. Thanks very much. I thought it was going to take longer, but I forgot my glasses.
Well, thank you. You did well without them. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Russell.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question. What was your address again?
Our address is 4016 Victoria Avenue. That's the one that we live on. It's, if you look at the northern boundary of the applicant's property, it's the larger yard there.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
No other question? Thank you. Thank you. So at this time, are there any other persons present this evening to address the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application by 1254349 Ontario Inc.? Please approach the podium and come forward, state your name and address, and spell your surname for the record, please. Sure.
Richard Goyette. I live in Cherry Hill, 3913 Rainbow Lane. Being distributed is a copy of the report I was going to present, but in order to get the biggest bang for my buck, I'm going to speak orally at first. You have the report, you can ask questions, and if time permits, I'll read some of the highlight.
Thank you.
I'm glad the mayor is here. You asked a very important question about the design. Are there other options, if I interpreted you correctly? And you stressed the fact that it's important when you're setting design standards. My concern with this project that's being advanced is pretty simple. I'm not against development. I moved here knowing that development made it possible for me to move here. But if I look at the town official plan, it talks about the fact that, if I remember correctly, something about 900 units is the growth plan for the town over a certain number of years. It sets out areas in the municipality where development can occur. It's done by way of zoning. We elect politicians to represent us and look out for our best interests. A zoning plan is a way for you folks to represent our interests, but also allow development. In a previous life, I was involved in development. I always find it problematic when someone would come to us with a zoning proposal, and 9 times out of 10, it's for a variance. Why can't people live within the zoning plan that you folks have approved? King Street and Victoria, I understand that intersection's to be developed. If I read press reports correctly, a few years ago, there was talk of apartments being above retail, like they have in Beamsville. We have Prudhomme's Landing, major development yet to happen. How does the 900 units that you planned fit in to squeezing this behemoth of 48 units into an ill-shaped, irregular-shaped lot with a tiny entrance and no alternate egress? My preference on a site like this would be townhome, low-rise apartment. This is supposedly a family community, and I appreciate the comment of the other speaker when he talks about he has friends, there's people that want to move here and can't. But I think of people who can't get a single-family home, so I think about them, townhomes versus an apartment. When I moved here 11 years ago, it was your community that attracted me because of what it was. We get people moving into Cherry Hill who come from Mississauga, Burlington. They want the quiet life. It's like Green Acres. They don't want to come to Oakville or Mississauga. It's within your power to enforce the zoning. When the presenter for the developer spoke, he talked about, well, it exceeds this, it exceeds that, but it's minimal. I wasn't born yesterday. When they gloss over stuff like that, that's important technical detail. Well, you should accept the 4-story because it's going to be lower than the 3-story and all this. It sounds like an auctioneer. I find that frustrating. It must be frustrating for some of you folks. It's the R1, R2 zoning. I couldn't begin to understand it in this area, but that seems to be the whole context of the problem here in the development. The challenge you're facing is like they're facing in Paris after the fire at Notre Dame. They want to restore a 1,000-year-old building in a way that is in harmony with the community. Some want class, some want the original lead roof concept. Decisions, hard decisions have to be made. I throw it out to you folks that that's what you've got to do, is make hard decisions. And you have to balance them with the needs of residents so that it's done in a way that doesn't seem to be favoring developers. I'm not against development. It has to happen. If I have some time left, there were a couple of things I wanted to highlight in my report here. I can't overemphasize the single entrance. I went to the fire department on Saturday. I asked them about the fire entrance. I says, it seems awfully narrow to me. Are you sure you can negotiate it with fire trucks? I was told, that's not our decision. You have to go to fire services in this building, which I haven't had time to do. We have an alternate egress point over here at Cherry Hill, which I'm sure some of you may be aware of, to get fire trucks and other vehicles in and out in an emergency. You picture an emergency with this design, the chaos. If there's a gun incident, God forbid, how are people going to get in and out of that facility? You have to think of that. I talk about children in the report. The gentleman over here talks about the neighborhood. I don't have children, but that doesn't mean I'm insensitive to them. I see the school children cross that Victoria. They're on their own the rest of the way. You're going to have 48 units with all sorts of vehicles going in and out on a road that's already over capacity in some respects, and the speeders.
Mr. Goyette, I'm going to get a visit here very shortly for the 5-minute
Oh, could I just
time.
have one thing?
So if you
I'll be
could,
very brief.
if you could wrap up, please.
My closing paragraph that I want everyone to hear. On overall reflection, this proposal comes across as an ill-conceived scheme without regard to the sensitivity of area residents. Furthermore, this is a project that seeks financial rewards from a zoning amendment without incurring additional expenditures that could allay the concerns of area residents. I want to leave you with that thought, that there's benefits to the developer, where are the benefits for us?
So hang on just a second. Thank you. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'm calling for a second time for anyone to approach council and speak to the public meeting item. Come forward. Your name and address, please.
It's Chris Juzda, Juzda, and it's 3958 Sunset Lane, Cherry Hill.
Go ahead.
Since before I begin, we have a petition signed by 243 residents of the Cherry Hill development community opposing this development, and I'd like to provide it to the clerk. I didn't have the resources to print off. It's a 10-page document, so I'm sorry. Print off copies for everyone.
Thank you.
Just a bit of background. Previous speakers spoke to Cherry Hill as well, but just a few more statistics involved here. We have approximately 400 voting residents living in Cherry Hill, and according to the 2016 census, that's about 10% of the population of Vineland. Our residents pay well over $500,000 in property taxes every single year, $540,580.78 last year to be exact. We also place a very limited load on services. All the services within Cherry Hill are privately funded by the residents. They're not town funded. We don't have children using community services and facilities. So the load on expense-wise on the community from us is quite small. we feel that this building will be a disaster aesthetically. It's a 4-story concrete modern structure dropped into a residential area. There is no consultation with residents by the developer whatsoever. There's another development going in on a similar property close by on Azalea, 17 townhouses. Why wouldn't this developer do something similar, since that is his area of expertise? This is not NIMBYism. We know that there will be other developments and there will be developments close to us. It's simply the fact is that this particular built structure does not fit the area. We're aware that the builder has no expertise and track record in building this type of structure. This is a home and townhome builder. At the open house, I just wanted to clarify some of the things at the open house. The builder claimed that he doesn't know whether it will be rentals or condos or how it will be established, what the target demographic is. It's hard to understand investing this kind of money into a development when you don't really know what the financial payback is going to be. The unit size is going to be extremely small, and we believe that they're going to be relatively underpriced for the area. And also, there's no way of knowing whether these units will be occupied by elderly people moving from their house to an apartment. Whoever, if it's a rental, whoever gets into that apartment stays in that apartment. They could be 20, they could be 90. It's not designated. And at the open house, actually, after the open house, the builder also claimed that the province had encouraged him to build a 6-story building on the site. Pardon me. So noise and light will be an issue, both from the rear of the rear units and the parking lot, regardless of any controls put in place. And we know the planning committee isn't supposed to really be concerned about our property values, but in a community like Cherry Hill, the first thing a potential purchaser looks at before purchasing a unit, they go to the community center, they look at the pool, they look at the facilities. That has a very large impact on their purchasing decision. So it will, in fact, impact our property values. There is no plan for any screening trees between the building and the community center. This building is going out 25 feet from the lot line, which puts it about 40 feet from the community center. The developer's consultant indicated there's a sidewalk at the back of our building. There is. There's also a patio that seats 20 people and 2 barbecues. So that back patio is used by residents. It's also looked directly down upon by the rear-facing balconies of the building. From another perspective, the tenants of this building are also likely to complain about noise from our building. We have a number of events that we hold there, and we're not the quietest folks around sometimes, as probably one of the other presenters can attest to. And when you have a balcony 40 feet away from an open door where there's dancing and loud music going on, I think that could result in some problems going forward from a neighborly perspective. As another presenter also mentioned, I'm looking at the official plan, Part 3, Urban Area Land Use Policies. 3.1.2, to protect, maintain, and enhance the character of existing residential areas. I'm not sure that this building design does that at all. To encourage high-quality design, that remains to be seen. General policies. In established residential areas which are relatively stable and where the potential for new development or redevelopment is limited, the building designs, building heights, and densities of proposals will be consistent with the character and identity of surrounding residential lands. Surrounding residential lands are all 2-story detached homes or bungalows. So it's not really in character. So in summary, the building simply doesn't fit the surrounding area. The structure, style, height, and close proximity to the property line causes an infringement on the privacy of Cherry Hill residents using their established community center. Light and noise pollution from the building and a large active parking lot will be disruptive to nearby residents. Traffic on Victoria Avenue, the main residential and commercial access route in Vineland, pardon me, will be negatively impacted and cause a choke point where Menno, Rittenhouse, and the proposed entrance intersect in an offset manner. If you go down and look at that intersect where Menno, Victoria, and this Rittenhouse and this new entrance is coming out, It's gonna be 4 different roads coming in at different angles. I think it's gonna be a mess. And so basically, in summary, the developer, we don't really know. The proposed building has been hastily planned, in our opinion, because there was a plan to put a retirement residence, a 3-story residence on that site before. Now it's a 4-story apartment block. Don't know what's coming next. So we think it's been done hastily without proper consideration to the many issues involved.
Thank you, Mr. Juzda. Just stay right there. Any questions for council? Seeing none, thank you. Is there any other speakers to this public meeting item? I am calling for a third, and we have another speaker. Come on in. Name, address.
So I'm on Azalea Crescent, Mark Castrodale. So I go by Dr. Castrodale. I have a background in geography, urban planning. And my concerns are numerous around this build, and I think we've already heard many of them. My concerns are also around governance, because I think you can see that there's a lot of pushback or opposition to this. So it's important that the voices are heard, represented, acknowledged, and that we have a sustainable approach. The approach does not seem to be sustainable, and if you look at other communities such as Grimsby or Stony Creek, it seems that developers are running the show. That's a big concern. However, if you look in terms of traffic along the roads around Azalea, and you look at traffic on Rittenhouse, the roads are in disrepair. They're in absolute disrepair. I have a wife, I have a son. I can't take a stroller along that road. It's dangerous. So if you're looking at developing and building in our area without providing for our community, providing for a sustainable, thoughtful approach to construction, the fact that young families, elderly retirement families can't walk along that street, and now you're going to put more traffic in that area, it seems really short-sighted. So that's one, the traffic flow, and the road is in absolute disrepair. The road needs some infrastructure repairs, minimum. So that's one predominant concern. There's also a small park, the Rittenhouse Park. Yeah, there's also the Rittenhouse Park. And when you're looking at this park, again, it has to serve the community. There was a short, brief moment where there was some traffic monitoring going along on that street, and the current speed limit is 50. Now, most people would not observe the 50, and if they were to observe, I don't know if any of you have driven a car along that at 50. Could you imagine driving a car 50 along a small park with no sidewalk or crossing labeled, where there's, again, young children playing? Furthermore, along that access route where that park is situated, there's no parking regulation, so cars can park along that access route right beside the park. Now, as you know, young children don't always know the regulations around crossing the street. In which case, where they would cross between parked cars. So that creates again a potentially dangerous situation for young residents inhabiting that area. But the most concerning matter is when we look not just in our community, but along the whole corridor, from Prudham's Landing to all the way to Grimsby, to looking at what's happened in Stony Creek. There's not an integrated, sustainable approach to transit, to our building practices. And if many of you have traveled, if you've looked at parts of Europe, we have a gem of an agricultural zone here. a true gem that needs to be preserved, respected, valued. And I'm not one who's against growth, but there needs to be smart growth. And at this moment, we don't presently see what would be an articulated plan. An articulated plan might say, well, we're going to allow some growth around perhaps a revitalized downtown core. Vineland doesn't currently have much of a downtown core. We might have a Foodland, we have some post office, we have a burnt down bar, but we don't really have what would be called a vibrant commercial center. Right? So,
Folks, if we can, as I said earlier, let's avoid the clapping and hooting and hollering.
but
I'm just asking you to do that now, please.
But principles of around land development would really take into account sustainability, would really take into account greening or the city beautiful movement or aspects around urban planning that actually make a community not only vibrant and healthy, but also safe to enjoy. And some of the provisions in our zoning do that. I mean, like if we're thinking about the actual heights of buildings, this is something that needs to be held in high regard. So with that, I want you to just take all of those words into account and please think of the people in the community you're representing.
Thank you. So are there any questions from council? Seeing that, thank you.
I have one further follow-up question. Have any of you been on Rittenhouse recently?
I'd say that there is in the report, there is information on Rittenhouse Road, so.
No, but I'm asking I want to know personally if you've been on that road. Have you visited it? Have you gone there?
Yes, we have, and if we can, we're taking this information, and we're gonna take your information. I think you made a lot of valid points, and we're gonna include it in the final report. So, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Do we want to share that? So I do. I think with 150. All right. If I could, I'm going to give it to the CAO for a comment, please.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think with the amount of people that are in the crowd tonight, I think for those of you that don't know, and I assume most of you do know, but we are engaging in the design of Rittenhouse this year, which means urbanization, in other words, sidewalks, and rehabilitation. So by the reaction, I don't think everyone did know that. There is an engagement piece to that will be happening this year. And then pending council approval of our capital budget, that road will likely be in the 2020 capital budget for rehabilitation.
So I am calling again for anybody that would like to speak to this public meeting item. Please come forward.
My name is Marvin Hepner. I live at 4016 Azalea Crescent, and I just have a question or something for City Council to consider when they regard the design of this building that was just proposed here. I don't know if you can bring that picture back up of the front of the building, but one of the things that's happening in London, England is reflection from glass-fronted services is creating problems for people who walk by and who live by and who work in and around those areas. So if this building is going to be very sun reflective or solar reflective, you may wish to consider the residents and the effect on the traffic nearby. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? None? Okay. So I am calling again for the final time for anyone to come forward and speak to the public meeting item. So as there are no more speakers, I declare this public meeting to address the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application by 1254349 Ontario Inc. closed. Are any questions from council? There being no further discussion, we have a motion that council receive official plan amendment PL OPA 201-90032 and zoning bylaw amendment application PLZ BA 201-80151 by 1254349 Ontario Limited for information, and that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and issues have been addressed. We will require a mover for the motion. Councilor Russell? All in favor? And that motion is carried. We will allow for 5 minutes for those that would like to leave so that we can move on. Huh? Oh, okay, okay, yep. Well, we know it's not, ready? Okay. Thank you for your patience. Our second public hearing is for the purpose of amendments to the zoning bylaw for seasonal tents. At this time, are there any persons present this evening to address amendments to the zoning bylaw for seasonal tents? Please approach the podium and come forward, state your name and address, and spell your surname for the record. Sue Ann?
Am I allowed to go first?
Sure, go ahead.
Sue Ann Staff, S-T-A-F-F, from Sue Ann Staff Estate Winery, 3210 Staff Avenue, St. Catharines. I hesitate saying that because it really is Jordan, it feels like Jordan. L2R6P7. So thank you very much for the report and the initiative to approve seasonal tents. I know this is a long time coming and previous attempts were made, so congratulations to this council for getting it farther along and getting it to this stage. So fantastic. I think when we have seasonal tents, it gives us the opportunity to showcase what we have in Lincoln. both where we are, specifically with our farm, and with our unique part of the world. Clearly, I'm in favor of seasonal tents. My family has a property that's it's beautiful. It's been handed down through generations. The inclusion of seasonal tents on the property has provided an opportunity to showcase Lincoln and to showcase our part of the world. Additionally, we're not bashful, and I'm not known to sugarcoat many things, but having events on our property and having a tent on the property has been a chance to supplement our farm income. With 2 cold winters in a row, 2014 and 15, and a year of rain, it's really been a savior. I also like that this puts us in the competitive set against some of our neighbors, specifically Niagara-on-the-Lake. They have had a seasonal tent permit policy in place for several years, and so I feel that they have the jump on us as far as developing programming that comes with seasonal tents. Seems like we've had this gray cloud above Lincoln in regards to seasonal tents. Frankly, the restriction of development and the maturity of this breadth and style and consistency allows us to not prepare for events and plan as being part of our business plan. But quite frankly, they bring employment, they bring tourists, they bring investment and security in agritourism. And in my book, that's good. I just want to get a little bit more granular with some of the comments to the policy. So one, thank you for doing it. I like the fact that there's no changes to the prices of the permits as well. Thank you for that. In this day and age where everything seems like everything is going up. So maximum $400 fee I think is reasonable. I see there's an additional new $150, I perceive as being new, $150 fire inspection fee. I thought that was included previously, so it's just kind of want to make sure that we're not being, as business owners, taxed with more fees. I'd like to ask, could these be one-time fees or just under advisement? Could this be a one-time fee? If there's no alterations year to year when the seasonal tent is going up and down, would we actually need to have this charge every single year? And subsequent to that, same with the fire inspection. So does that actually need to happen every single year? And can, if there's no changes to the tent year to year, if that could be waived? I also applaud you for the timing of the provisions that are put in the policy as well. With it, seasonal tents being able to go up May 1st and down by November 2nd is very reasonable. One area of concern, though, that I have is the way it spells out that the seasonal tent is restricted to 24 events a year. Given the timing, there's only 6 months to make this investment pay off. Stakeholders need more events in that space to make it profitable. I would recommend the number increase to something like 40 or even for it to be unlimited, since we're still going to be bound by noise bylaws and special event permits. I know a open house was on May the 1st for this bylaw change. It was also the day of the Ontario Craft Winery Conference, which was in Toronto. So I'm not sure the response was from the open house. However, if there's a lack of involvement or comments from the wine industry, I would attribute it to many of the decision makers for wineries being at that conference at the Beanfield Centre in Toronto. So that is my comments.
Thank you.
Is there questions at all?
Is there
or-
any questions from council for Sue-Ann? Thank you. Okay, I'm calling for a second time for anyone to approach council and speak to this public meeting item. Come forward.
Curtis Fielding, 4020 Locust Lane, Beamsville, Fielding. Just wanted to comment, I guess I haven't got too much communication. I got it through the Twenty Valley Tourism Association that this meeting was tonight. I guess I'm not on the list. I don't know. I was on the committee for the events, and we don't get emailed on this, so I don't know. Something got slipped. So, anyways, I just want to reiterate Sue-Ann's comments are all very good. Being limited to 24 events, I think would be hard for some people. I think there's enough teeth in the bylaw the way it's written. If there's bad actors, you guys can get rid of them without putting a limit on it. One comment I wanted to make is it'll be good to have this in. I would like, as a business owner, to pay one set of fees. I don't want to be down here a million times during the summer. We're busy. Pay one set of fees. We're done for the year. That's good. I like everybody here, like coming to see them. We're very busy. It's been a moving target every year. I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble. The staff doesn't know what fees to charge. We come down here, we bring one check, thinking we're gonna pay a fee. It's a different amount. I just like a set of procedures that it's clear. Today, I got an email about our tent permit for this year. Now we have to pay a $1,000 performance bond, which I haven't seen in any of this, and that's news to me. So I put an email in for clarification because we've never had to do it before. And tracking performance bonds from previous construction, it's a pain to get it back from the town. So that's my comments, and hopefully we can get this streamlined and make it easy for everybody.
Okay, thank you, Curtis. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Are there any other speakers wanting to speak to this public meeting item?
Good afternoon, or good evening. I concur, my name is Michael Casaba, K-A-C-A-B-A, 3550 King, Vineland. I concur with the previous two speakers. I'd just like to reemphasize once more the intent of the bylaw seems to be geared to someone who would put up a tent and keep it up for the whole summer. There may be some of our members who would put up a tent, take it down for a weekend, and then a month or two later put up the same tent again, and perhaps even a third or a fourth time. If they're asked to pay that and have an inspection, it's just another tack on the wall that they have to approach. So keeping it simple would help all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. No questions? Good, thank you. Are there any other speakers to this public meeting item? Come forward, please.
Yeah, hi, Council. My name is Ted Lezak, Legends Estates Winery. I've been going through this, Sue-Ann, and anyone else involved with wineries. This is an application in 2012 that was applied for by the town of Lincoln for seasonal tents. This is 2012, okay? There was an objection by a neighbor. This went to OMB. I was applying for an estate winery from a farm winery designation. The town was applying for this seasonal tent permit. Just to backtrack, in 2010, when we applied for a tent, we made one application. We paid, I think it was $400, and we got a permit from May till October. And then all of a sudden, council comes up with this 3 days up and down. We put a structured tent out. It takes us 3 days to put it up. And then you want to hold an event and down. A couple of years ago, we're bringing in about 5,000 people to the area for weddings. We don't do weddings anymore, so I don't have a vested interest in this tent issue. But this is absolutely ridiculous. I know it's a new group of people here at council, and you should really look at it. This is your paper. This is a copy of what you guys presented. Neighbor objected. I was approved for getting an estate winery. The town didn't get the approval for the tents because it was, I think it was it didn't conform to the official plan. So the town had to go back and redo this. I got my approval for the estate winery. The town then takes their legal bill and puts it onto my taxes. Now it's $35,000. And I'm not paying because I had nothing to do with it. I represented myself, okay? So then we went ahead and we got the estate winery designation. OMB told us that we can hold weddings and events on our property on the south side of the laneway away from the lake, basically in the middle of a vineyard. Can't use the lakefront property because to them it didn't make sense. So as a result, we don't do weddings anymore, we don't hold very many events anymore, and we don't bring in about 5,000 or 6,000 people a year to the area. So all I'm saying is somebody should look at this a little more carefully, get off your, and get this done properly. This is going on now, what, 7 years? And you guys are still talking about tents. It's ridiculous. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Lezak. There is a question. If you want it, please come back to the podium. Mary Easton.
Mr. Lezak, in regard to your comment about the tent, are you, should I understand from your comment that we should not be having a discussion about tents at all? That if a tent is required on a property for events and your zoning permits you to have the event, that you should be able to put any infrastructure in place that is needed to satisfy that zoning?
That's correct.
Okay.
You don't have to go through a zoning to get approval to put a tent up, according to the Municipal Act and the Planning Act. And I won't get into that with you, but I can show you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers tonight? So I'm calling for a final time for anyone to come forward and speak to this public meeting item. So seeing no more speakers, I declare the public hearing to address the amendments to zoning bylaw for seasonal tents closed. Any questions from council? Mary Easton?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that those who have spoken and others that are here this evening understand what the next process will be in regard to the questions asked and how the discussion will take place and how we will be moving forward.
Can I put that over to Ms. Dale? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there actually is a recommendation before you to actually adopt the amendment as proposed. So committee at this time has a couple of choices. They can approve the bylaw in the form that's currently before you, or you can direct that staff make further changes to the bylaw to address some of the public comments that have come out tonight, in which case a further report would be presented to the June meeting. Some of the comments, I think it's important, I think that staff should also bring up. In regards to the seasonal tent issue, when this matter was before the Interim Municipal Board several years ago, that was based on the policies of the previous official plan. In 2014, the town adopted a new official plan, which provides much more direction for value-added tourism-type uses. Also at the time, one of the reasons that the Interim Municipal Board didn't approve the bylaw at the time is because we didn't have any sort of special event permitting process, and our noise bylaw needed some work. So those were two of the main reasons. We now have a special events permit process in place. And the noise bylaw is also the subject of our report tonight. So there's a lot more regulations in place to address this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Dale. Mary Easton.
Is it necessary, Mr. Chairman, through you to Ms. Dale, is it necessary for us to approve the noise bylaw this evening prior to considering the motion in regard to the special events tent permit?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's not necessary to approve the noise bylaw tonight. The noise bylaw is coincidentally before committee tonight at the same time as this particular bylaw. This bylaw can go ahead on its own based on the policies of the official plan. Staff are of the opinion that what's before committee tonight conforms with the current official plan. So it can go ahead without the changes to the noise bylaw.
Mr. Chairman, if the noise bylaw is passed, is it necessary for us to have the special events permit process?
Sorry. Through you, Mr. Chairman, so there's actually a couple, I guess, couple moving pieces with this. One is the regulatory framework, which is proposed changes to the zoning bylaw to allow, tents to remain up for the season versus someone having to take them down. There's also, when there are special events, the noise bylaw is one of the enforcement tools. So, and the other thing that we've also committed is we've had a special events policy in place for approximately 1 year, and staff are committed to reviewing that with the stakeholders to see whether that process will remain or whether there will be some changes to that process. So there's actually 3 different items in play.
Mr. Chairman, I'm having some difficulty with the evaluation period because it seemed to me that we spent most of last term talking about this. And it was my understanding that the piece that was missing was the noise bylaw. And prior to 2014, we also didn't have bylaw officers in place, and therefore it was very difficult to uphold. It was difficult to call somebody who wasn't there, and then, of course, you had to have a good bylaw that you could enforce. So we have all that in place now. And I'm really having second thoughts about whether we need to have this at all. Whether we need, obviously, we need the noise bylaw, but I'm trying to understand why we need to have this special event permit. And I don't know, and I understand paying a fee if you have to have the fire services there to inspect it. I understand the need for the fee. But if it's staying up all summer, then I'm hearing the proponents say that one fee, one application, one fee. I guess if you're taking it up and down, that's another consideration. But I'm having some difficulty understanding the rationale now that certain circumstances have changed, particularly with the noise bylaw much more robust than it has been.
So, Madam Mayor, just a point of clarification. So you mentioned the special events bylaw.
tent, the tent
You're talking to the tent
I'm talking about
issue.
the tent permit.
So, through to the staff, with regards to tents and zoning, is that something that we need to review?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in regards to the current zoning bylaw, the current zoning bylaw has wording in there that you can only have a tent for special event purposes, and it can only stay up for 3 days. So consultation that's occurred over several years from a number of the stakeholders is it's not really, it's very difficult for some of the stakeholders because every time they want to have an event, they have to take out a permit, and after 3 days, they have to take the tent down. So, and then there's continuous inspections because every time you put up a tent, you also have to do a building and a fire inspection. versus if you do one for a seasonal, on a seasonal basis, you can do one inspection.
So the bylaw, as we're looking at it tonight, is needed because of our bylaw, our zoning bylaw. And will that be taken care of in our overall zoning bylaw discussion that we're also having a presentation on tonight? Does it mean that we need this tent bylaw for a year, and then next summer we'll take care of it with zoning, potentially?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. This is a site-specific amendment to the existing bylaw, which will allow things to happen over this season. The new zoning bylaw will probably have some similar provisions, but it will not come into effect until next year. So if you didn't do this particular site-specific amendment this year, proponents would still have to take out
them
building
down.
permits and
Yeah.
get fire
Yeah.
inspections for every single tent
Yeah.
permit.
Does that answer your question, Madam Mayor?
Yes, I'm just sorry that we have to spend another year on it. It's really, I don't know, we've had enough experience with it. I would like to forego that, but I don't know whether there's any other way to do it. I don't know whether the CAO, Mr. Chairman, through you, might have an idea
Mr.
for us. I'm
CAO.
just trying to help this, our policies here are enabling policies, and I
Sure.
just would like to push this a little bit further to make sure that we are enabling what we ought to enable. We don't want citizens like Mr. Lezak to be the example, all the time.
Mr. CAO, would you like to make comment?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think just to try to add a little bit of clarity to the conversation, there's a couple of different things we're talking about. The tent permit report that's in front of you really is to allow tents. So tonight we have two options. Either we take into account some of the additional comments we heard this evening and we defer it and we come back in June, or we decide to approve it as is. My thought in listening, and of course we're at council's discretion, is maybe to see if we can make some final tweaks based on what we heard tonight and come back in June, but that will be with council for your decision. And the second is the noise bylaw. So we've updated it to reflect a number of items, not just related to special events, but generally. And so that'll be something that we'll be hearing about later, but they should be considered separate, notwithstanding, I can tell you there's a commitment from staff to look at our special events policy and to making it as simple and as easy as possible. No different than our tent permitting process. So if there's a few extra additional tweaks we can make between now and 2 weeks from now when the report is due to get on next month's cycle, then we will do that.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, I would be satisfied. I don't know how the rest of my colleagues feel, but I would be satisfied that that is in itself progress. Thank you.
Councillor Rinjima, you are on.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. So I'm aware of the history of this initiative. I remember from the very beginning trying to make it easier on people that wanted to put a tent up. They had to keep taking it down every time, come back in for a new permit. That was the impetus for this whole initiative from the very beginning, and it's been a long time coming. So we have to move forward and do this. We're reviewing our zoning bylaw, that's true, and we should make changes to make it a little easier on everybody, and I think we'll probably see that happen. So I'm not sure. I would like to see it come back, I think, next month, or as soon as Mr. CIA was talking about it coming back, because I'd like to look again at the limitation on 24 events per year, and I'm not sure what the point of that is, but I'd like to have another look at that. Thank you.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I support that as well. I think we need to tweak this a bit. We want to listen to the comments regarding the $400 fee. Is it going to be every year? Should it, be a one-time thing? The other thing, I noticed the $1,000 performance bond. I didn't see anything about that at all when I was reading this tonight. I'm just wondering, there's some unanswered questions. So I really think we need to come back, tweak it a bit and come back. And I also, I'm not in supportive of the 24 events. If you're putting this big tent up, you're paying a fee, 24 events, that's one event a week. So it doesn't make sense to me to limit that either. I think it should be unlimited. And we definitely want to support our farmers and our wineries, so thank you.
Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. Reading in the report, I'm to believe that for each event over 150 people, you are to apply for a separate permit each time? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's correct. As per our most current special events policy, when you have an event over 150 people, subject to some other criteria as well, i.e. it's not necessarily a normal business practice. It's something, it's exactly what it lends itself to. It's a special event. Yes, you have to apply for a permit for that event. And the idea behind it is to, was to streamline the review process by, making sure that departments such as the fire department have an opportunity to review a plan, public works, if there's any road closures, things of that sort.
Thank you. So I understand the spirit of this amendment. I understand it's a pain setting up tents and putting them down and that sort of thing. The concern is with the bylaws, and with each application, is there a parking requirement? Is there a fire requirement inspection with each application, or how does that work?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Whenever we obtain a special event permit application, it gets circulated to town departments such as the fire department. They make sure they review it in terms of, their ability to access and maneuver through the site should there be some type of event that happens that requires their response. But yes, typically that occurs whenever we receive an application. So in terms of parking, they are required to provide a parking plan as well. And we typically review that in terms of location, making sure, as I said before, that there's adequate space to maneuver and all those things. So the parking is considered in terms of them having to provide a plan of where they're going to provide that space for people to park for their event.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, so further to other councillors, that there could be some tweaking to streamline the application process in more of a blanket form, seasonal form. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. And certainly the feedback around the council table is that we defer for these changes to be made. So I have a deferral motion that the matter of amendments to the zoning bylaw for seasonal tents be deferred to the next meeting of this committee. So that would be the June meeting. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Pachariva, all in favor? Opposed? None? That is carried. Thank you, and thank you for all those coming tonight to speak to this public meeting. I think we're going to get it better than we've got it right now, and we're going to move it quick. I know that's important. Okay, so I'm going to carry on, as I know Mayor Easton's leaving us at 8, so we're going to carry on, and then we'll take a short break at 8 o'clock when you leave. So we're moving into the presentations portion of the agenda. We have Greg Bender and Tommy Karapalewski from WSP presenting regarding the zoning bylaw review. Please come forward, gentlemen.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, your worship, staff, and members of the public, we're from WSP. My name is Greg Bender, and this is Tommy Karapalewski. And the intent of our presentation tonight, I recognize that you have a fairly loaded agenda tonight, and I don't mean to keep you here longer than necessary, but we're here to talk about the exciting world of zoning.
As was discussed by a number of people tonight, correct, your zoning bylaw is currently being reviewed. We started the process only a few months ago. And the intent is to really undertake an overhaul of your zoning bylaw, and I'll go through that a little bit more detail, and Tommy will certainly get into the details a bit more. But what I intend to do is really talk about the project in essence, what the work program looks like, and then Tommy will take a look at sort of what have we done so far, what does the discussion paper look like, some of the key issues and opportunities, which is something that we'd like to obtain feedback on, as well as we'll be moving into sort of a public session over the upcoming month to talk about that with members of the public, looking at next steps and any Q that there might be. So as I mentioned, we're looking at doing a complete overhaul of your zoning bylaw. There's been a lot of discussion tonight. I assume that's not unique for this committee, but your current zoning bylaw is quite old. It's from 1993. Now, there has been a number of updates to it, but the intent of our project is to completely overhaul that and replace it with the very contemporary new zoning bylaw. There's a few things of the reasons why we're doing this, and the main one, as you've probably heard through the various committee meetings, is to ensure that there's conformity with the official plan. Your official plan is relatively new compared to your zoning bylaw, and the intent is that to avoid everybody having to go through various zoning amendments to conform to that official plan, it's our job to make sure it does conform, so you can avoid the, as you might hear in the past, sort of red tape when it comes to sort of various development opportunities or applications that have been before you. This also serves as a very good opportunity to examine issues in more detail, and Tommy will certainly go into that in a bit more detail, but there are a number of issues that have come up over time that we've been charged to examine in more detail to really understand what the solution is and how that could be incorporated into the zoning bylaw. As part of the process, we're also looking at updating definitions, again, making them more contemporary, consolidating zones, so just making up a number. I know there's municipalities that have 15 to 20 zones. Our job would be to look at opportunities to consolidate where it makes sense, and really one of the things that I like to do as part of any particular planning project, zoning bylaw is no different, is to look at opportunities to increase flexibility. So you don't have to go through a minor variance, or you don't have to go through a rezoning for every single opportunity for development. Another thing, by updating the zoning bylaw, is looking at sort of easing the use and format. Zoning bylaws, as for those of you who have read yours and many other zoning bylaws, they're not the easiest to read. They're often worded in very much legal speak. And there's a reason for that, but there are opportunities to tighten that up to make sure that everybody who could read that understands it. So just to provide an overview of the study work program, we're in stage one. We're right at the beginning of the program. What we've done to date is undertaken a communications and consultation strategy that we've shared with staff and received feedback on. The intent is, with that document, is to really showcase how we intend to engage with committee, staff, members of the public, stakeholders, and anyone else who intends to participate in the process. We've completed a draft discussion paper, which is really to identify a number of the issues that we've heard from staff, and the point of this is to take this discussion paper and engage with committee members of the public to understand if there are any other issues we should be looking at in greater detail. No surprise that we're at the committee meeting tonight to provide sort of an overview of the process and where we are. We are looking at stakeholder consultation sessions, as I've mentioned, as well as a public open house, after which we would complete the final discussion paper and move on to stage two, which is really getting into preparing a summary report in the draft zoning bylaw. The summary report is really providing solutions and opportunities on where some of those issues that we're discussing at stage one and how we should be solving those as part of the zoning bylaw process. We're going to be doing that over the summer and winter of this year and looking at finalizing this document in roughly winter, spring of 2020. With the statutory public meeting, open house, and then ideally council adoption in 2020. Is this me or you? It's me. So as I mentioned, I've gone through this a little bit more. I'll go through it in a bit more detail. So we already did a community stakeholder consultation strategy. Some of the activities to facilitate communication over the course and study that we're examining as part of this work is committee meeting tonight as an example, individual stakeholder consultation sessions, which I think is, I can say for many of the zoning bylaw projects that I've undertaken, we don't typically do that, but that's certainly unique to this project and I think will be supported across the town. open house meetings, which is typical for a planning process, but we're also supporting that with staff for, say, a project website, individual for this particular project. Social media platforms, using that to understand when meetings are going to happen, when certain things are available for review. An individual online questionnaire that we're going to be preparing to solicit feedback as part of the work that we're doing. Because you can only engage so much through an open house or a meeting like this, and trying to get that information out through various platforms, whether they be websites, social media, or questionnaires, I think will aid in the ability to get feedback. Again, as I mentioned, the statutory public meeting and open house, and then the council adoption meeting. And as I mentioned already, the draft discussion paper, which is being used to really obtain feedback on some of the issues so we can move forward in a productive manner as part of the next stage to, again, study these in a bit more detail.
Okay. So the purpose of the discussion paper, it's basically the basis for consultation with committee, staff, stakeholders, and the public. It's an analysis of relevant documents and focus areas. It's also analysis of the existing zoning bylaw to understand the updates that are required to conform to implement the town's new official plan, as well as current provincial policies. Lastly, it identifies key issues for discussions. The consultation process will benefit from the report so that directions are agreed upon and that there's a comprehensive understanding of the issues. So the discussion paper identifies and breaks out the issues into 3 separate categories, including official plan conformity, policy issues, and core zoning issues. So the first is official plan conformity. It's important to be responsive to the form and function of the lands as the town is contemplated by the official plan. So this means alignment with land use designations and boundaries identified in the official plan. This also means permission of appropriate uses and establishment of provisions for agriculture-related uses, agritourism, and on-farm diversified uses, which are defined in the 2014 PPS. It represents an opportunity to guide height and transition adjacent to established and low-rise neighborhoods. So the zoning bylaw allows the municipality with the ability to establish lot and building requirements through a range of mechanisms like lot size, lot frontage, yard requirements, height, lot coverage, among others. Provisions for angular planes can also be used to control these height and transition adjacent to established and low-rise neighborhoods. And also alignment with provincial policy guidance towards intensification and implications on density, lot sizes, and setbacks. Another category we've established is policy issues. So the new zoning bylaw presents an opportunity to develop and implement appropriate provisions and standards to implement provincial policy, as well as policies and plans. And we'll also analyze emerging issues and trends in planning. The first is affordable housing. The Planning Act requires municipalities to consider permitting secondary residential units. So a refined approach to treating secondary residential units through the new zoning bylaw will achieve greater conformity with the official plan. There is also inclusionary zoning, which is another land use planning tool afforded to municipalities under the Planning Act. And that is to be provided in residential developments of 10 or more units. Another is cultivation and production associated with cannabis. So this zoning bylaw review will consider the specific provisions for cannabis cultivation and production. This includes how and where they're permitted, appropriate setbacks, buffers from non-compatible land uses, and specific parking requirements. Additionally, it's anticipated that the zoning bylaw will need to recognize and be cohesive with other bylaws, just so that we can regulate cannabis and cultivation production, such as signs, lighting, or hours of operation, for example. And lastly, there is short-term accommodation. We'll need to determine an appropriate regulatory approach for short-term accommodations, whether it's through zoning or licensing tools. And the last category that we have in the discussion paper is core zoning issues. So it's important for us to kind of determine which policies have been effective and what provisions will need to be updated through the zoning bylaw. So we can also use contemporary zoning tools and approaches like zone overlays, suffixes, customized zone standards, and et cetera. Some of the core zoning issues are parking and driveway regulations. So there's an opportunity for reduced parking rates for shared parking and mixed-use developments. So the zoning bylaw might permit reduced rates for certain uses depending on times of the day. So mornings, afternoons, evenings, or different week periods like weekdays or weekends. There's potential for inclusion of minimum maximum visitor parking provisions. There's an opportunity to update the definitions and ensure that they're clear and contemporary definitions. We can also include illustrations for technical definitions, lot line definitions, yard definitions, or general provisions that would further assist the reader in the interpretation of the bylaw. Within the general provisions, there's an opportunity for modernization and streamlining general provisions. So this could include the inclusion of non-operative notes to provide clarification, or further regulation of certain uses like temporary garden centers that would otherwise be an accessory use. Some other core zoning issues were related to the format and organization of the bylaw to ensure that it's readable and user-friendly. And some tables of permitted uses and standards would certainly help towards that. The inclusion of diagrams, illustrations to clarify definitions or general provisions, and mapping legibility, make sure that it's easy to read. Use of a lot of colors to kind of help people with determining what certain uses are. And lastly, implementation, so opportunities for consolidation or elimination of site-specific exceptions or special provisions through updated provisions and standards to make the zoning bylaw more user-friendly. So some of the next steps, as Greg mentioned, we have a public open house that we're anticipating for spring 2019. From there, we'll receive all the comments from the public and stakeholders, and we will finalize the discussion paper. After we've finalized the discussion paper, we'll draft and provide a final summary report. So the summary report will advance the research from stage 1 and address the key issues identified in the discussion paper. The summary report will also include an official plan conformity exercise, highlighting areas where the current bylaw does not conform to the new official plan. And the report will also include research on trends and best practices with the overall objective of examining key issues, present options, recommendations for addressing the identified opportunities. And then after that, a draft zoning bylaw will be prepared based on the recommendations of the draft summary report. And after that, we'll have a public open house and a statutory public meeting and open house, and council adoption would follow. Are there any questions or comments?
Okay, thank you, gents. There is a question. I do have a question from Councillor Regima.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Thank you for your presentation. The discussion paper was interesting and very useful. I'm sure you've heard that we just started the process of having a housing task force, and we've had one meeting. We're having another meeting tomorrow night. So we want to look, one of the first things we talked about in the first meeting is looking at what ways that we as a municipality can provide a wide range of housing options for people within our municipality. So in the discussion paper, you pointed out secondary unit policies, inclusionary zoning, community benefits, and short-term accommodation, which I found very interesting. So those are 4 ways that we can, 4 tools that we can use to provide flexibility so that we can have a wider range of housing options within our municipality. So it looks like you've had a pretty good look at our zoning bylaw. I don't know if you can answer this question at this point, but do you foresee that we'll need any amendments to our official plan to incorporate any of these initiatives?
Through you, Mr. Chair. As part of the work that we're doing, we are going to identify, so typically as part of a zoning bylaw review, we would analyze your existing OP and your existing zoning bylaw to see where there's gaps. We're also potentially going to be looking at other issues that your official plan hasn't even considered yet. And as part of the work that we're doing, we're going to offer solutions to that, whether it be an official plan amendment or even an aside study that might require a separate official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. As you're likely aware, there is only so much a zoning bylaw can do without the direction in the official plan. So we're going to certainly identify those to make sure that you're well covered.
So, thank you. So we're going to look at whether we're covered within our official plan to implement these 4 initiatives that you've pointed out to allow for more housing options. And so I'm looking forward to having those discussions with you and throughout this process, because it's aligning well with what we're doing. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenters, and maybe this is a better question for the communications, just regarding public input, stakeholders, how do you determine who is a stakeholder? How do you reach out to those that you feel would be stakeholders with regards to this review?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We're working closely with staff to get a list of a good cross-section. There's 2 opportunities I see. Getting that cross-section of people or industries that we can engage directly with, as well as having another opportunity to engage people in a more general way through other means, whether that be the open house. Stakeholder, as you're well aware, stakeholder is the general term. It might be more apt to say businesses or other landowners, where that might have an individual interest as part of this project, but we're looking very heavily on staff to determine that. We're helping them to sort of identify a list of areas that might be of interest, but we are looking for as much input, whether that be from staff, perhaps committee, as to who we should be engaging with.
Okay, and reason I'm asking, I just want to make sure that those that are interested, I feel this is a pretty important review, and I want to ensure, and I want to make sure that those that have an interest or do find out about it or do have a way of providing input. I heard earlier in an earlier presentation that a gentleman didn't know, and I want to make sure that, you know, we give the people the best chance at providing input where possible. That's my concern. Thank you.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, regarding Greenbelt, NEC, and NPCA, and those designations that seem to be very arbitrary to them, what is your advice for council? What is your advice for anyone whose land falls under any of those provincial mandates? They may disagree. They may not even be aware that they have EC designation on their property, or even that in the last review, their properties or part of their properties were included in the Greenbelt, were collected into the Greenbelt. What is your advice to people in regard to, is there any point in them coming to the meeting to discuss these matters?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Madam Mayor, the intent is part of our exercises to conform to the official plan, so we would be taking a large part of our guidance from your current document. I would never say for anybody to not come to a particular session just because they may be in a particular designation or within a provincial area that might give them certain restrictions on development. But we try our best to engage as many people as part of any planning process as we can. There often are people that are either unaware of the process, and then we would typically ask whomever, whether that be staff, members of council, committee, to reach out to their constituents to make sure that they're aware that this is being undertaken. But for those individuals who are in a provincial plan area, whether it be Greenbelt or the like, yes, this zoning bylaw isn't going to solve any of that, but obtaining feedback as part of this process, I think, would be very helpful.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Chairman, the report that we have that's under review is from 1993. To the presenters, what is your advice to council as we receive requests for zoning amendments? Are we obliged to follow a very outdated document, or is the view of the province that we will use the most contemporary information that's available to us, even though it's not official in our own zoning bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think I know where you're going with that. As many of the committee are likely aware that, well, call it Amendment 1, but the new growth plan was recently approved and came out. That being said, the municipality has their legislation that they have to follow, and that very much in this case would be Section 34 of the Planning Act, which has not received any amendments to that based on any work that the province has done yet. I know there's been perhaps correspondence from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing related to potential amendments to the provincial policy statement or the Planning Act in regards to any major planning exercises that might be undertaken, whether it be official plan or zoning bylaw. To your question, my best advice would be to work within the framework that you have right now. There is certainly nothing wrong with amending a zoning bylaw depending on what the application is, provided it conforms to the official plan. That is within, your scope of what you can do under the Planning Act, and there's nothing wrong with that. Notwithstanding that there's a more contemporary solution that is on the horizon, I certainly wouldn't hold up anything depending, because the timing of that is certainly not available at this time.
Right. Very good. Thank you for the clarity. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair McPherson, through you to the delegation. Just a couple questions. With respect to minimum density targets, they originally were increased from 50 to 80 residents, but now the density targets for Niagara have been reduced back to the original 50. So with respect to that, the minimum intensification targets in built-up areas increased from 40 to 60. So are we going to see a corresponding reduction in that as well?
So it's an interesting question. I have questions like that too about how this is to be disseminated to lower tiers. And by lower tier, I mean, sorry, Mr. Chair, through you, from the province to, say, the region to, say, lower tier municipalities. That is still very much up in the air.
Okay.
I have to assume that, as I mentioned to Madam Mayor, you still have to follow those processes. So notwithstanding what might be in the growth plan, which thou shalt conform to today, there are still other exercises that have to happen at the regional level as well as in this level to understand what that looks like here. So
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't know yet. I'm hoping that we get that answer over the next month, but.
Okay. Okay, and then I guess a follow-up to that through you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the province outlined some new regulations around garden suites, ancillary units in homes, addressing the whole affordability issue. Will that be addressed in the new zoning bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it will.
Okay.
To the extent which it can, because as I mentioned previously, that if there are certain aspects of new legislation that isn't captured in your official plan yet, it will need to at some point.
Okay.
So part of the work that we're going to be doing is identify where there are those gaps.
Okay, and then one final question, if I may. Opportunities for consolidation or elimination of site-specific exemptions. So, we're a Greenbelt community, limited room to grow, and I think, and you've seen it this evening, the biggest point of consternation is infill development. We go through this, we've got pretty diagrams that lay out color, picture, site-specific, minimum separation distances, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Invariably, we get something that wants 10 amendments. Can we put some more teeth into this to say thou shalt follow the rules? And by that too, identifying, and rather than it be more open-ended, say, okay, this development can occur here, and this change can occur here. Just so there's a heads up coming, because I think that's the biggest sense of frustration, is that these things seem to be floating in a cyberspace, and then someone addresses them, and it just, that's what we're faced with. So wondering if we can, site-specific, we can pull in on those and say, okay, if you want to build on site A, these are the regulations, and if you can't adhere to them, then it won't happen.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll answer that sort of at a higher level than more
Okay.
specifically. So, planning in Ontario, you know, we work within the framework that we're given with legislation that we have with the Planning Act and PPS. From that, you have regional governments that provide a whole, you know, host of policies and requirements for local municipalities. And then you have your official plan that takes guidance from all those documents and you try to distill that into what makes sense locally. Zoning, and as official plans are, zoning is very much a document where you look at understanding what's appropriate on the site today, whether that be zoning to conform to what might be coming in the future or what's appropriate now. And zoning is very much a document it's a very much a living document that a zoning bylaw is meant to evolve as, you know, your community does. It would be very difficult, if not, I won't say impossible, because there are provisions in the planning, like holding zones that you can put on properties to make sure that you have what you want, but that is fairly restrictive. So I will say to your question that I don't see many tools in the Planning Act that would restrict from the municipality getting exactly what they want on that property. But there are ways to try and help that discussion, whether it be requiring, as you have, site plan control, which is another opportunity to really work at the ground level on a development.
Appreciate it. One more question, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Before we leave that, I think Mr. Bruder also had a comment
okay.
with regards to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just further to that point, it is something too that we hope to achieve through this review is, you know, the reality is, from a planning standpoint, that a lot of the development that's happening and going to be happening is going to be of the infilling nature now. And I mean, I think when, you know, the zoning bylaw that's existing that we have now was created, that wasn't nearly as much the case. So coming out of this review too, I think is opportunity to look at, you know, what the provisions are in the different zoning categories, whether it be residential, whether it be commercial, and look at provincial policy in terms of, you know, what are the intensification requirements, and then we work with the zoning parameters that way too, to see, you know, maybe there's a more appropriate set of provisions that addresses that moving forward. I hope that provides a little clarification.
No, that's great. And one last question, if I may.
Go ahead.
With respect to minimum distance separation, so the other point of consternation is the urban-rural divide. So bona fide farm practices that are incumbent for the farm being a viable agricultural operation, as the urban boundaries, not that they've expanded, but they've changed with respect to build-out. So, you know, again, and I go back a few years ago, and I shudder when I even think of it, is the issue that we had with respect to a duck barn operation, that minimum distance separations weren't site-specific. So wondering if we can drill down a little bit more as we get to that, to look at site-specific agricultural minimum distance separation zoning, working with OMAFRA, because it's often blanketed, and it's not. And if you are that person that experiences the conflict, it's real, much like the cannabis. So we've come a long way by putting in the interim control bylaw and going to actually look at this. We visited a site last week as part of our ECDev week that's the gold standard, in my estimation, on light, on smell, on everything. And I think everyone should be brought to that level of standard, because then there is no impact. So just your thoughts, if we can get there on the minimum distance separation for ag.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be, well, getting there, I think, would be subjective. I think we'll certainly do our best to study that and make sure it's encompassed in the review that we're doing.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson, through you to the presenters. A few months ago, we passed an interim control bylaw regarding cannabis operations, and I see this as one of the key issues that we are going to be focusing on. I'm just wondering around timeline. We're looking at winter, spring 2020. I'm just wondering how that's going to work with our interim control bylaw that we passed.
Mr. Chair, We are certainly proceeding as one of those being a fairly significant issue that we're going to be studying. I would ask staff through you to understand sort of the timing of your interim control bylaw and what sort of the flexibility is for any extension to that, to ensure that it does fall in line with the work that we're doing, because we certainly wouldn't want to sort of run out of time before it's studied.
Exactly.
Mr. Bruder?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we did pass the interim control bylaw in January this year. As you know, these interim control bylaws, they're put in place for a year while you undertake a study, just like what we're doing. There is a possibility to extend that. However, we certainly don't want to go that route. This is something we'd like to stay on top of. As a matter of fact, this might even be something where we would look at doing some type of amendment on an interim basis to our existing zoning bylaw as a staged approach moving forward to make sure that it's addressed in a timely manner.
Okay, I guess that's what I was looking for. Thank you, Mr. Bruder. And I just have one other question. I'm really glad that we're doing this review, and I see you've got, 3 key issues and opportunities. As we go through this process, do you foresee more, I don't know if you can answer this, or maybe I need to ask staff, more key issues and opportunities that may arise after we have input?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I can't speak for what we're going to hear at the public meetings, but if there are, we're happy to consider those as part of our review. Everybody has their own individual issues, and I certainly don't want any to sort of fall off the side because we don't feel like it's part of our typical review. So, we have our limits on what we can do as part of our scope, but we certainly can add that into our overall discussion as if any solutions are available.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you very much.
And Councillor Regima, I'm going to give you the last word.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. My question's about Prudham's Landing and the big development that's coming on board. We did the secondary plan, and they've submitted their draft zoning bylaw, and they're in the process of doing that. So, draft plan. They're in the process of going through that process, and we're in the process of going through this process. So how do we marry the two and make sure that the developer, just how are the two going to coincide as we go through?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The way, and I don't want to speak for staff on how they would intend to handle this, but typically that process is being done under your current framework. I do see opportunities for ours to dovetail with theirs to ensure that we're not reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of good work that's happening now, and where that has been reviewed by members of the public and committee and council, we certainly wouldn't want to do anything to prevent that from moving forward. But we certainly would be taking that as part of this and incorporating that into the work that we're doing where that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you, gents, and thank you for sharing that with us tonight. The timing is perfect for us, and we look forward to the process. So thank you. So as I said, we are going to take a short break here. I would ask for the audience's patience. I would ask that the council be back here. We are now at 8:03. If we could be back here at 8:15 so that we can carry on with, we're going to move into delegations. So thank you. Okay, folks, we are 8:15. If we could have the council come back, please, and we can get going, so that we're not here any longer than we need to be. We lost the council. We're here, you're here, that's right. Thank you, Councilor Russell. Okay, so we are now at the delegations part in our agenda. Please note that each delegation may speak for up to 5 minutes. So our first delegation is Kaylin Holmes from Better Neighborhoods, Inc., speaking to item 8.4 PD-36-19, zoning bylaw amendment application by Better Neighborhoods, Inc. Ms. Holmes, you have the podium.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Good, okay. We have a presentation here. Kevin also has physical copies. If anyone in the audience would like one, you can just throw up your hand and he will bring one over for you. So good evening, everyone. My name is Kaylin Holmes. I'm from Better Neighborhoods. We're the development and urban design consultants working with Kevin Neeson from North Shore Homes on this project. And we are in agreement with the report prepared by town staff and appreciate their input into this process. I want to start off to say that I wish I had more time tonight to more carefully respond to the many concerns that we've had raised by stakeholders. But as these are generally more specific to things that will be refined through the town's rigorous site plan control process, I will be focusing mainly on the details with regard to the zoning bylaw amendment. And to that end, we have a 3D model that we've had made to assist in visualizing those changes. So this is the revised site plan, and I'm just going to play through the presentation. It will just cycle through everything as I speak. So in addition to working with town staff and agencies to verify that the site has the capacity for adequate services and options for site drainage and emergency services, a sidewalk connection from the existing path and azalea through the site has been provided to ensure that both vehicle and pedestrian access to Victoria Avenue is available when those lands become available. Access through the property fronting on Victoria was requested from the property owners, but as we are not in the habit of expropriating land, and as the owners would like to continue to enjoy the use of their yards as is, we will all have to patiently wait for that potential opportunity. Our redesign also includes a tree-lined boulevard along the sidewalk between the street to ensure the comfort and safety of pedestrians. Neighbors have been rightly concerned about access for fire and emergency vehicles, and we take those concerns very seriously. I myself experienced a house fire as a child, so I know of that trauma. By law, we are required to meet Ontario Building Code standards for fire route access and have provided the standard 6-meter route, as well as working with the fire prevention officer to ensure the site meets the town standards. And we will sprinkler units as necessary. The safety of the quiet neighborhood streets in this community is of value and should be protected. In addition to incorporating design features to slow vehicles entering and exiting the site, a third-party traffic consultant has verified that the site will generate only about 10 to 15 trips during the AM and PM peak hours, so 7 to 9 AM and 5 to 7 PM. The site now provides a surplus of 9 parking spaces in excess of what is required by the current zoning, including 5 visitor spaces to address concerns for overflow onto Azalea Crescent. And following the last meeting, we have met with public works staff and have confirmed the site has sufficient capacity to accommodate the development. In terms of the committee's decision today regarding the zoning of these lands, it is my opinion that the proposed use supports and facilitates provincial, regional, and land use and growth policies with the implementation of a walkable, human-scale design and the provision of accessory dwelling units. It brings the zoning of lands into conformity with the town's official plan for medium-density residential, which permits up to 35 units on the site, though we are proposing just 17 primary dwellings. I note that you just had a presentation from WSP, who is assisting you to ensure your zoning bylaw is in conformity with your official plan, which envisions a sustainable, human-friendly built environment for residents while implementing provincial policies for future growth. This plan assists in implementing that vision in a way that respects the character of the existing neighborhood while ensuring future development along Victoria can carry on in a similar way. We are not proposing an apartment building, low-rise or otherwise. We are not maxing out the density on the site as permitted by the official plan. When the zoning of this property is brought into conformity with the official plan next year, an apartment building may very well be likely, up to 60 units per hectare. Despite this, we are offering the design before you today because we believe it is the best we can do to facilitate sustainable growth in your town. Moreover, Kevin has demonstrated through this process that he is committed to working with the town to ensure the property meets standards for safety, servicing, and neighborhood integration, and will continue to do so through the site plan process, where we will further refine details of landscaping, urban design, and servicing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Just one question on your handout under other concerns. Could you just clarify or maybe expand on the definition of sprinklering of units as necessary?
Sure. I had to look up if I could actually say sprinklering. I don't think it's accepted by Microsoft, but the Ontario Building Code basically describes how fire access has to occur on any given site, and it's up to the town's fire prevention officers to interpret that and implement it. So working with Trevor Dermanick on this site, we've been told that because there is no turnaround for trucks, that all the units on the site would have to be sprinklered. And that's not because the truck can't get into the site, it's because they only permit up to 90 meters of a fire route without a turnaround. So even though you can tell from the site that a truck could very well go straight to the end, we do have to sprinkler all the units because we go beyond that 90 meters.
Thank you for that clarification.
Councilor Patrieva.
Thanks, Chair McPherson. Just looking at my notes from last month's meeting, I thought it was brought up too about a possible connection. You talked about the exploring the connection to Victoria Avenue and why that couldn't occur, but thought there was also mention of a connection to the path in the storm retention pond and the park, which would allow easy access to Rittenhouse as part of the upgrade that's coming. So just curious why that maybe wasn't talked about or investigated at this point.
It's not a done deal. It's something that we can look at through the site plan process. Kevin is actually very eager to have that connection as well. I think it would be a benefit for the whole neighborhood. So we will continue to look at that in the site plan control process.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Regima.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I was listening, but I'm not sure if I heard, if you could let us know I heard there were some changes that were made from your last presentation till now. Could you just itemize them for me?
Sure. So the kind of major change that we made first to the site was the implementation of the Sidewalk Connection, which you can see starts actually across Azalea Crescent where the existing sidewalk is, and then would provide that sidewalk to connect with the sidewalk on the other side. And then it goes around the 8 units on the south and goes through the site to where it now dead ends. So that was the first thing to do because it changes the geometry of everything that we have going on there, and we kind of have to build from that. From that, we changed from 8 bungalows to 6 bungalows. So we now have 4 bungalows on the top of the site and 2 at the bottom, with double car garages, which has added extra parking to the site, along with an extra visitor spot along the street entrance from Azalea. So we have a surplus now of 9 parking spaces in addition to what's required for the primary dwelling units and accessory dwelling units.
Okay, thanks for outlining that for me. We talked about accessibility. We heard about that for anybody really, but for seniors in particular. I really like that there's bungalows here. That's definitely needed. We definitely need that. So I'm quite happy that, you know, I said earlier on that we've established a task force for housing, and one of the things that we need is bungalows and accessible units. So I'm happy to see this. And I know that there's more tweaks that can be made through the site plan process. Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick question. I believe at the last meeting, there were some concerns about grading and drainage. And I know, again, you kind of illustrated that. I believe you said that the sanitary stormwater discharge sufficient capacity to accommodate proposed development. Is everything going to be draining north? I guess that's north towards that pond?
Through you, Chair, we're still working on those details with Public Works staff. Our current proposal is that we would wish to go to the storm detention pond, given its capacity to support additional water. Mr. Glenbar can speak to it in much greater detail if you wish, but again, it's something that we typically work through in detail with the site plan process, but I'll pass it over to him.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we met with your Public Works people, and what we did is we agreed that during the site plan agreement process, it was clear that we can accommodate the storm drainage in either way we wanted to go. So if your staff wants us to store water on the site, we can do that and direct it to the pond, or if we don't need to store it, then we can direct it to the pond. So we've got things covered both ways, and we agreed that we would do that during the site plan agreement process. So we've got the flexibility.
Okay. So those houses that back onto the houses on Azalea, the houses on Azalea that back onto the development, they won't have any issues with any water draining down into their property?
Well, as a matter of fact, they're uphill from the site. So they have a catch basin in the back of their yards, and that catch basin presently drains their yards to Azalea.
Okay.
To Azalea, and will continue to do so. And our drainage from our side, we look after our own site.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you for your presentation. Our second delegation is Alan Wintermute, speaking to item 8.4 PD-36-19 Zoning Bylaw Amendment Application by Better Neighborhoods, Inc. Mr. Wintermute, please come forward.
I sent in a PowerPoint on this, part of the,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Council. My name's Alan Wintermute. I live on Magnolia Drive in Vineland. I am going to try and get this done in the 5 minutes allotted.
Thank you.
The problem I have with the application to rezone in its present form is the requirement for severance. I want to tell you why. I will restrict my presentation to 3 concerns. My friends and neighbors have comments on the other points that are equally valid. Here are my concerns. It's not walkable. For seniors and persons with disabilities, you have to first go west before you can go east. And you have to go south before you go north. As for the fire route, it's only partial. Rescue will be delayed. Full benefit of the emergency service equipment is restricted. This is not right. Drainage problems? Well, I'm going to cover that in a few slides. This is what's proposed. The sprinkler system in all units is not a responsible measure to meet needs for rescue. I contend that a sprinkler system to take the place of emergency services, including emergency medical service, is not in keeping with the policy 1.1.3.4 as it relates to avoiding risk to public health and safety. How can it? There are 3 drainage areas mentioned in the report: across land to the north and east of Victoria Ave, the pond to the west, and a catch basin at the rear of the neighbor yards at the north side of Azalea. There's another means of stormwater is currently handled, being absorption into raw land. The applicant proposes to redirect stormwater to the pond. When the buildings are complete and pavement is in place, soil absorption is lost. Their plan is to restrict flow and add on-site storage. If this does not work, is there a backup plan? Please pardon the pun. These things are expensive to build and to maintain. And the ultimate question, how big is big enough? We've got more rain this year than we've ever had. If you want more detail, I'll be happy to provide during questions. Looking ahead, it's hinted at phase 2. Will storm sewer pipes be added to the pipes in phase 1, sending more water to the pond? If this will not be a good idea then, why is it a good idea now? Alternatively, will storm sewer flow from phase 1 to be diverted to phase 2? Would phase 2 storm sewer be connected at that time to Victoria Avenue? And here's the big what if. Is everything covered? Planning department seems to put a lot over for later consideration to the responsibility of the developer. If severance of the parcel of land is allowed now, would a different developer and perhaps a different condominium corporation be involved later at stage 2? A stage 2 is contemplated in the Planning and Development Report, specifically at page 145 of 198 pages. My suggestion is don't sever. There's a better way. The town of Lincoln can do better without a severance. The result is conveyance of all the land to the developer now. The current dwellers can stay until phase 2 as a matter of contract. The benefits to the community would be as follows. You'd have a walkable path to Victoria Avenue immediately. Fire route flows better with the emergency service across to all units equal to everyone. And that's accomplished by flowing it into the existing driveway on the northbound, or the most north part of the property at Victoria Ave. Stormwater flows naturally and is better managed with curbs and catch basins along the north end of the parcel of land. And continuity of site plan control on the entire parcel of land would be accomplished. Without severance, phase 2 would be ready. No need to go through rezoning applications again. Variance for setbacks, if required, will be in place. And here's the added benefit. By turning the buildings, impact is minimized on neighboring existing yards. The side setback is less than a setback required for backyard or front yard. Drainage is better managed, and building does not block water flow towards the lake to the north. So my suggestion, let's get this right the first time, because there are no do-overs. Appeal is a concern raised in the Planning and Development Report at page 146 of 198, and if council adopts the no severance as a solution, there is an added benefit to council. As contained in section 34 of the Planning Act, council does not refuse, and this is right out of the act, council does not refuse an application for an amendment to a bylaw under section 34 if it amends the bylaw in response to the application, even if the amendment that is passed differs from the amendment that is the subject to the application. And if you want to check it, section 34, subsection 11, point 0, point 0, point 0, point 3. That's the paragraph. In other words, if council amends the zoning to affect the entire parcel of land as it's now registered and forbids severance, the decision of council would be appeal-proof. A decision not to allow the land to be severed and yet rezone the subject lands would be better meet the needs of the community, at the same time satisfy the provincial policies, conforms to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and conforms to the regional official plan. This is my presentation, all of which is respectfully submitted, subject to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wintermute. And I'm going to start with Chief Hudson, or the chief, and there's a lot of discussion around the whole fire piece of this. Can you make comment with regards to what is proposed and how we sit on that today?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. This whole development has been subject to a number of discussions with respect to fire safety. One of the ones that was identified is the fact that the fire access route is insufficient according to building code. The present configuration shows that it has a dead end of greater than 90 meters, and a fire access route of that length requires a turnaround. So it's common practice in the fire industry to look at the fire risk in a more wholesome view of things, and where there's a deficiency in one area, i.e. the fire access route, it does allow the authority having jurisdiction to consider alternative solutions to that. One of the considerations that we are in agreement with is the ability to substitute having a fire access route of, it's a little shy of what it should be, with providing additional fire protection by way of sprinklers. And in my professional opinion, the reason for a sprinkler is really to stop a fire before it gets to the point where you actually have to effect a rescue. So the whole point of a sprinkler, when it's properly installed and operating, is that it will stop a fire from really growing and allow the people to escape. And you know, to my knowledge, there's never actually been a fatality in a residential structure with a sprinkler system. So in that case, we are actually quite willing to go above and beyond. And my opinion is having a sprinklered development far outweigh, in terms of benefit, far outweighs the benefit of having a dead end. The dead end is a little bit problematic. It's not so much getting the trucks in, but the National Fire Code and a number of fire codes actually require the ability for a fire truck to turn around in case the fire gets too big and you can get the trucks out in a timely manner. So again, with a sprinkler, presumably you wouldn't get a fire of that magnitude. It would be caught before it got to that point. So the rest of the fire access route meets code. It's of sufficient width. It's of sufficient turning radius. We don't necessarily require having an entry and an exit. We can get into the fire sufficiently, not only for fires, but for emergency medical calls as well. And, I think having all the factors before us, we're prepared to accept that alternative solution.
Thank you, Chief. And I'd also, can I just address a couple things that you brought up so that we can at least get responses to your presentation? And then we'll go to the council and they'll be asking questions. So, patience. If I could get the planning department to speak to the drainage piece, please.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So the presenter is correct that there were initially 3 drainage catchment areas identified. But moving forward, what's going to be happening with respect to drainage, or at least an option that has been considered feasible, and I'd like to center on that for a minute, what's considered feasible. When we look at zoning amendments, when we're at this stage, you know, it was mentioned that there's a lot that's left to site plan control. Well, site plan control is more the detailed design. At this particular stage, when we consider a zoning amendment, yes, we do need to consider things like drainage, how they're going to properly convey drainage. We don't want any adverse impacts happening to adjacent property owners. But at the end of the day, it is a preliminary design exercise. We have to make sure that there are options available. In this case, as the applicant said, there are some. There is the potential to upsize some of the underground infrastructure to make sure that we have capacity to store for a 100-year design storm. So that is definitely an option with controlled flows out to the pond so as to not to inundate the pond in those particular events. So there has been lots of consideration with respect to drainage. Grading's another important consideration that, again, we look at a preliminary level to make sure that, you know, the drainage, you can make it work so as to not have increased runoff to adjacent properties, but the detailed design of that grading will also be something that gets further clarified at the site plan stage that will subsequently be undertaken.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to council for any questions that you may have. Councilor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Directed to planning, I guess. I'm not sure if anybody from Public Works is here. Sort of along the lines you just finished up, Matt. In the redesign of Rittenhouse, is there any expansion of services considered in that, or is it strictly urbanization? Like, is it just sidewalk, curbs, and asphalt type thing? Like, what all is involved in the redesign of Rittenhouse?
Through you, Mr. Chair, although my knowledge is a little bit limited compared to my Public Works counterparts, and I can certainly follow up. My understanding is most of that work is contributing to the urbanization of the road. With respect to the services, I'm not entirely sure if there's going to be any changes to the sizing. As far as I knew, the capacity for those services running along there was adequate, but like I said, I'd have to confirm that and get back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you. Our third delegation is Matt West, speaking to item 8.4 PD-36-19, zoning bylaw amendment application by Better Neighborhoods, Inc. Mr. West.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, Council, and staff. My name is Matt West. I live with my wife and 4 children at 3985 Azalea Crescent. I've had the opportunity to speak before, and I thank you again for the opportunity. After reviewing the staff report of the application made available, I still have a number of concerns regarding the application and the proposed development. I know a lot of them have been brought up already. I'll try to touch on a few different ones, maybe go from there. Some of these discussions have been discussed already, so I'll skip going through most of those. But I do want to point out some policies. As outlined in the staff report, the opinion is that this application is consistent with provincial and town policies relating to residential intensification and that it conforms with the town's official plan. And I respectfully disagree with that opinion. I'd like to highlight a few of these policies. So these provincial policies talking about residential intensification state that you have to avoid or mitigate risks to public health and safety and encourage active transportation and community connectivity. And then the policy outlined in the town's official plan says that you should implement suitable building setbacks to preserve the existing character of the neighborhood and meet current parking standards and meet or improve traffic movements so as not to negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood from the perspectives of safety or neighborhood character. And then this other policy, I know you guys are familiar with all these policies, but I'm just highlighting them. To implement suitable building, that's that one there. To issues such as landscaping, traffic, servicing, and parking that they've been addressed, to integrate the development with the character of the existing neighborhood and reduce impacts on adjacent properties. So the proposed Solario Place development, it doesn't align with these policies. So the applicant is asking for rezoning with site-specific provisions for yards, frontages, and lot area. And these provisions are for the configuration of condominiums and do not align with or preserve the existing character of the neighborhood. I'm going with the character theme here because it kind of hits home a lot. The chart in the staff report outlines those provisions, and there are many of them in the chart that was available. The solution to servicing the area for garbage and snow removal is that it will be contracted privately. And will this mean that garbage and snow was piled up at the entrance of the proposed development? I don't think these concerns have been adequately addressed. The applicant has incorporated more parking spaces in the proposed plan. On paper, this may look good, but in reality, it may not play out. Parking spaces are small, and the total number of parking spaces includes garage parking, and really how many people actually use their garage for parking instead of storage. I think you should consider that. And then the amount of traffic funneling in and out of the proposed development does not meet or improve traffic movements for Azalea Crescent and the surrounding neighborhoods. The staff report indicated that proposed development would generate between 10 and 15 trips in each of the weekday morning and afternoon peak hours. But I'm not sure how accurate that will be when you have the potential of 21 working families coming in and out of the proposed development. I'm not sure if that's going to be accurate. This proposal does not encourage active transportation and community connectivity. The only way in and out of the development is onto Azalea Crescent, and it does not connect in any way to Victoria Avenue or anywhere else, so you're not connecting the community that way. But what this proposal does do is it negatively impacts the surrounding neighborhood from the perspectives of safety and neighborhood character. The amount of traffic that will be generated from the proposal and the lack of access from other streets besides Azalea Crescent doesn't seem very safe. Having delivery trucks, snow removal, garbage trucks, emergency vehicles enter through the small private opening and back out onto Azalea will cause problems. And what type of barrier is being proposed to protect the adjacent properties from the volume of traffic generated from the development? I live in one of those adjacent properties. In regards to neighborhood character, I would like to point out the following policy from the introduction of the official town plan. So in that policy, it says that to protect the protection of small town character, one of the objectives is to respect the character of existing developments and ensure that all applications for development are physically compatible with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. This application and proposed development does not respect the character of the surrounding neighborhood, nor is it compatible. The proposed condominium-style development doesn't mix with the existing character of the neighborhood. We live in a relatively quiet neighborhood, and dropping in condominium development within the amount of proposed units in the middle of an already established neighborhood will completely alter its character. And these images are taken from the staff report and the public notices, and they show where the proposed development is located, but it doesn't give context to where it is, like in relation to the neighborhood. So here's the image of the surrounding neighborhood between Rittenhouse Road, Victoria Ave, and Azalea Crescent. And then there's the footprint of the proposed development. And there's the footprint of the proposed development in relation to the inside residence of Azalea Crescent. So the proposed development is half the land size with the same amount of residential units as the inside of Azalea Crescent. And the same amount of traffic is expected to funnel through the small private driveway/road of this proposed condominium development. This development is landlocked between the existing neighborhoods and doesn't conform to the type of existing developments. The existing neighborhoods consist of detached homes and some townhomes. There's no privately run condominiums in that area, and this development will absolutely alter the character of the existing neighborhoods. So in conclusion, just wrapping up here, we recognize the difficult decisions town council has balancing the official town plan and residential intensification. It's a pretty tough job. But we hope that these difficult decisions do not overlook the importance of public safety while promoting active transportation, community connectivity, and improved traffic moments. And we trust that town council will consider the character of the existing neighborhood and how this proposed development does not conform to the adjacent properties and neighborhoods of the current residents living there. And I do not believe that the Planning and Economic Development Committee can confidently say that this proposed development satisfies the policies outlined by the province and town regarding residential intensification, and ask that council not approve the recommendations outlined in the staff report. just one last comment. I think it's important that, I know Rittenhouse is slated to be developed, but I think it should be developed first and then things should fall into place after that. Kind of like, let's get the other stuff fixed first and then we can add to it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. West. And are there any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you. Our fourth delegation is Mark A. Castrodale, speaking to item 8.4 PD-36-19, zoning bylaw amendment application by Better Neighborhoods, Inc. Mr. Castrodale.
Yeah. So again, I'll go through it. I go by Dr. Mark A. Castrodale. And I want to focus solely on, I think that the notion of character is important, but I want to focus on the aspect of respect. So it's supposed to respect the character of current developments. And I think you can see in our community, with the numerous people who have come out, that there's a great deep respect for each other, for this community, for what it stands for, and for the feel that it has. And every place has, you know, both kind of the site-specific stuff, but it has a feeling. And in the community, there is a feeling. And it feels a lot like the area that I grew up in, which was once Stony Creek. It's now a concrete jungle. Respecting the character, when I look at this revised site plan, I don't feel that it respects the community. I see a parking lot, and I don't know how many of you would want to live right next to a parking lot, but I know I don't care for the design. The design doesn't respect our community because it doesn't have the charm or the character. And frankly, it's a poor design. So we can talk about the intensification, we can talk about how it has too many homes and everything of that nature. We can talk about aspects of connectivity, and we can talk about traffic flow as we have to pass the Rittenhouse Park. But the main point that I want to stress is really that it doesn't show that degree of nuance or respect for the location. It doesn't have respect for the design. It doesn't fit within the fact that there are many detached homes. And as a new homeowner in that area, I can't say that it won't detrimentally impact me and others on a very personal level in terms of our property values. I think if anything, it will diminish the quality, character, charm of our neighborhood, and that will be to our detriment. So that's the main point that I want to raise, that it's not showing that degree of respect for our community.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you. Our next and fifth delegation is Marvin Hopner. Apologize if I've got that wrong. Speaking to item 8.4 PD-3619.
My name is Marvin Hepner.
Hepner.
Hoeppner. I live at 4016 Azalea Crescent. And the first thing I'd like to do, I'd like to point out that, I'd like to thank the presenter over here with mentioning that if we don't turn this into townhomes, by golly, next year there could be an apartment there. So how does town council, through you, Mr. Chairman, stop this threat? And how do we stop that person who is currently involved in developing this property from turning around and selling it to someone who intends to make it an apartment? Where does council finally say, stop, that's it, okay? She said she didn't want to expropriate land to go onto Victoria. Is purchasing the property at fair market value expropriation? I'm not sure of the term or the dictionary use of the term itself. One other thing I'd just like to bring up right now that was brought up tonight, through you to the police, to the fire chief there. who checks this fire sprinkler system after it's been installed? Is this done on a yearly basis or monthly basis? And then who would be responsible for those costs? Is it the developer that's gonna have to pay those costs on an ongoing basis? Or are the people who purchased the property is gonna have to pay for them? And are they gonna be pre-warned about possible expenses? Thank you.
Are there any questions? Thank you. Our sixth delegation is Robert Thompson, speaking to item 8.4 PD-36 zoning bylaw amendment application by Better Neighborhoods, Inc.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to the application. As I said before, we know the development is coming. The concern is with how it is done and perhaps now when it is done. The staff report has a lot in it and touches on all the issues previously mentioned, but there are still major concerns. Now, a number of these have been covered. On point 1, I have the provincial policy statement encourages community connectivity and wants projects to avoid health and safety concerns. You've heard this already. And yes, the sprinkler system is going to be installed and one fire truck can get down the road. But I'll repeat, when that fire occurred on Azalea, we needed more than one vehicle to get in there. We had to have the aerial truck to knock the fire down. And in addition to that, the fire started in the garage. So are we putting sprinklers in the garage too? Who produced the traffic report that town staff reviewed? 10 to 15 trips in the weekday seems ridiculously low when you can estimate up to 38 vehicles. And connectivity, well, the only connection is to Azalea Crescent. No other route has been created. Now, second, places to grow, growth plan talks about having a walkable environment and transit viability. Page 13 of the staff report states that it is within a 5 to 10 minute walk of the Vineland Central Business Area, local amenities and public services, including the school. That's as the crow flies. It is not that without a connection to Victoria Avenue. And as you heard before, walkers will have to go west to go east, etc. School children coming out of Solera will have to cross Azalea twice if they use the south sidewalk, or they will just walk on the road to get to Rittenhouse Park. Then their walk on Rittenhouse Road will have more vehicles from the Solera development and possibly that apartment building that's going in nearby. Access to Victoria Avenue would make transit readily available since the U-Link bus travels on it. The town official plan on page 10 identifies a range of considerations to ensure compatibility with the current neighborhood and reduce impact. The access and traffic from page 11 states it shall meet or improve traffic movements so as not to negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood from the perspectives of safety or neighborhood character. The increase in traffic is still definitely a concern for all Azalea Crescent residents and those on Magnolia, where they will have to exit onto King Street, and on Honeysuckle, where they will have to exit onto Rittenhouse. And the building design, I didn't see anything in the report about that. Do the buildings in the second proposal still have the multicolored Disneyland effect that we saw in the first part? Under other issues, drainage has been mentioned more than once, but I'd like to ask again, how are they going to do this, and where is the potential storage area? We still have the same number of units there. And on all of those, setbacks have been reduced. The parking, yes, that has been improved, but some future residents better drive compacts, because parking on the north side, if you look at the diagram, shows 2.75 meters, which is 9 feet, but the new double driveways are 4.8 meters, which is 15 foot 9 inches. Waste collection and snow removal are mentioned on page 16, and it appears that the proponent is being asked to find private contractors that will collect the garbage and do snow removal. Will that be done by the proponent? Has the developer actually found contractors willing to drive in and then back out? That should be determined before any approval and not be dismissed by saying the condo corporation will handle it. What if they cannot? And reference is made twice to the applicant having asked the current owners for a pedestrian connection to Victoria Avenue. I'm concerned that this lack of a cooperation may extend to another area. 2 residents familiar with Vineland have said that businesses were run there. Has there been any information provided about the condition of the land and if any products were buried or discharged that would require soil remediation? And then, who in the Niagara region made the determination that access to Victoria Avenue would not be supported at this time? In my view, this is a crucial issue. The developer has expressed an interest in going further with a solar place when the current landowners on Victoria decide to sell. That means the ramifications of a phase 2 should be considered. With the approval or disapproval of the development just to the north of Solera on Victoria Avenue, I mean the apartment building talked about earlier, what are the chances of the region allowing another road access? If no connection is allowed, then this whole project should be reconsidered. Another 10 to 12 units added to this development will compound all the issues already brought forward. Their current traffic study would be even more meaningless. We could be looking at over 60 vehicles coming out onto Azalea. And point 5, in my view, there has been no real effort at compromise. For example, could a place for vehicles to turn around be made by eliminating one unit, or some kind of redesign? Can a space for snow be found? With the help of the town, would it be possible to create a walkway out of the northwest corner of this property? Move the pond fence slightly west a few feet and have a safer route out to Rittenhouse. In summary, throughout the staff report, it is indicated that if the application is approved, a variety of concerns would be subject to site plan control in the future. It reminds me of what happens in some elections. Vote me in, you can trust me to do it right. I believe that more issues should be resolved before any approval. Significantly consider the likelihood of a phase 2. Let's get things done appropriately at the start and not have problems left to the town and residents to resolve later. And Chair, if I may, a bit of a point of order. When we started to see the developer's signs up on Victoria Avenue, I went to the town on Monday, April 29th and asked what had happened, that these signs were up and it looked like the project was underway, and I was told nothing. 3 days later, on May 2nd, a 22-page report was posted. On Monday, May 6th, we received notification in the mail about the report and that this meeting was in 1 week. There has also been no change to the sign posted on the property. This should be done to alert other residents who did not get a letter. In the meantime, the developers had since February 11th to prepare, and we had just the 1 week. Thought that needed to be mentioned.
Thank you, thank you. I do know that the chief would like to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions that were raised by some of the presenters. The one in particular was about the sprinkler systems and the upgrade, or the upkeep, I should say. It would be the responsibility of the owner to maintain the system. However, with the residential sprinkler system, under what they call NFPA 13D, it's a domestic system that uses typical domestic plumbing, no real special components. If you have sufficient water pressure, you don't even need a pump. So it's really a simplified system, fairly easy and economical to maintain. Unfortunately, Hollywood has done the fire service a real disservice by portraying sprinkler system as something more of a bad thing rather than a good thing. So as far as that's concerned, we would have no problems. And there are mechanisms by which in the agreement of sale and purchase and sale, there are clauses that can be put in to make the homeowners aware that, number one, there is a sprinkler system, that they are required under the fire code to maintain it, and that they agreed to do so, on an ongoing basis. And again, in terms of the access, I think we covered that in terms of the fire truck access. I was at the call on Azalea a few years ago, and that was a horrific thing. And again, if we had sprinkler system, and depending on the layout of the houses, they can sprinkler garages as well. It would, keep the fire in check before it got to that stage. And fortunately, no life was lost. And it was a good thing. Unfortunately, the fire did spread to adjacent homes, but again, I can't overemphasize enough the importance of having sprinklers to keep the fire in check before it gets to that stage, and it really eliminates a lot of the concerns about fire access and that kind of a thing, so.
Thank you, Chief. And I have asked our CAO just to speak, since we haven't got the Director of Public Works here, I asked if the CAO could speak to the snow plow issue that's been raised by a couple.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the delegate, and I think you mentioned, sir, the provision to hire a contractor for snow and garbage. That is our typical practice. It's a typical practice along condo developments like this. I think when we use the term condo interchangeably with what effectively is a townhouse development, the condo piece is the way the management board would structure itself in order to pay for the provision of certain services. We have a number in the community, in the Jordan area, for example, where we do have a similar exercise. We do work with Niagara Region to determine the best place to place garbage. We work with the condo corporation, and I can assure you that a typical process around hiring a private contractor is how we would address snow here, and it just wouldn't be piled, I think, in a manner that isn't respectful and cognizant of the location and the residents in that particular area.
I'm cognizant of that fact, but the problem is that this is a unique development with only one way in. And that's the problem. Whatever truck goes in there, whether it's a snowplow or the garbage trucks, they're going in one way, they're gonna have to back out the other. That needs to be determined. Otherwise, if the garbage does not get picked up at the house like the developer has contended, then it's gonna be out at the end of the road of the development on a sale.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Thank you. Our seventh delegation and final registered delegate is Jeffrey Breen to speak to this item.
It's it's Jeffrey Breen, 4305 King Street, Breen. It's really comments on the new proposed bylaw for noise.
Is that under this, so it's not on this particular issue?
No.
Okay.
No, this is under the new
All right,
proposed
well,
bylaw.
let me reintroduce you then. Sorry about that. So, speaking to item 8.6 PD-38-19, proposed noise control bylaw and amendments to the fees and charges bylaw. Mr.
There you
Green,
go.
the floor is yours.
It's just a few comments on it that I think that are not quite, let's say, it needs tweaking up a bit. The decimal levels, I think, should be lower to 50 at the complaint zone. Because if you're in your house and you can hear someone with a normal conversation that's 200 meters away, that's rather loud. And there is, on the exemption forms, there's no place for any one of the residents surrounding residents to have any input on it. So all of a sudden you get a letter in the mail, the place next to you is having 10 events. We've been trying to be proactive in the previous 4 years, and we had to go reactive, and one of the facilities was cited by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, which they can lose their license. My question is the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, if they cite something and then you're going for approval, will that show up on their approval application or their application for an exemption?
I see we've been joined by our bylaw officer. Would you care to make comment on that particular question, since we've got you here?
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. That's not part of our current review process to have, we don't get the information from Alcohol Gaming Commission as it relates to one of the properties applying for a noise exemption permit. Their issues are guidelines under their own legislation. It's separate from our noise process.
So could there be a guideline somewhere in the paper or in the application that they have to disclose it, the applicant.
So we are making a decision tonight on the noise bylaw, and I know you've been an active member in the whole public process and have been involved from the start. So I would think that many of these things were discussed or brought forward prior to tonight. Were they not?
No, not all of them. Some of them were. They originally said 3 events per application, now they've raised it to 5. The number of events per property, and even like you extended the noise till 10 p.m., but when you have an exemption, like last year we had a wedding that was squeezed in at the last minute, and you yourself said you were unhappy about putting it through, and it was a complete nightmare. And it went on to 2:30 in the morning. It was
Okay.
supposed to end at 1.
So is there anything else that you
Well,
or-
if the alcohol and game, there should be a place that each applicant on the exemption form, have they been cited by any government agency for noise?
And I think we addressed that
Yeah.
through the answer.
He can't go and ask
Yeah.
for it, but they should disclose it.
So what we're gonna do tonight is we're gonna take into consideration your comments here tonight and add them to what the council has heard on the noise bylaw, and we're gonna have to make a decision on
Yeah.
the motion that's in front of us.
And then like after 12 PM, it is a farm, it's not a nightclub. So there should be a cutoff to what time they can have an event, especially during the week. People do go to work on the next morning.
Okay.
And last year, according to the Niagara Regional Police, they were instructed by the town's administration not to attend Redstone Winery when they have an event because they had an exemption for noise. Noise isn't an unlimited amount of noise.
Agreed. And I think we do have that in this new noise bylaw that we've introduced, that line in the sand.
So we have a guarantee from council that the administration or the mayor will not interfere with the enforcing of the bylaw?
If you want to speak to the enforcement of the bylaw?
Yeah, I mean, through you, Mr. Chair, the enforcement through the new bylaw, it's more robust, so it gives us more authority. It allows us better opportunity to staff during these events as well. And our staff will be enforcing based on the provisions or conditions that are placed in an exemption, if there is an exemption in place. If there's no exemption in place, a standard noise bylaw would apply.
And the fees should be more for each event, because why should the taxpayers be paying to monitor these events? I believe probably an officer probably costs approximately $300 for an 8-hour shift, the town, if not more. And whatever it costs for that shift for them to be on should be covered by the facilities.
Okay.
And like I say, no second party events like the wedding was. Then the facility says, oh, well, we're not responsible because it's the wedding party made the application.
Okay.
I don't know if what else there is, I've brought up these all along.
Yeah, and I think we've taken your input into consideration.
It's been
in
4
put-
years, so let's
It's
get
been
it
lengthy.
right this year.
Yes, agreed. Thank you, Mr. Breen.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. So, before we move over into the next part of the agenda, I just wanted, since we still have a fair number of people here, I just wanted to give everybody the opportunity, even if you were not registered to speak, to come forward and speak to either one of these 2 items. So is there anybody else that would care to speak to the Better Neighborhoods, Inc. item or the noise bylaw item? Seeing none, we will proceed. So we're at the consent agenda. part of the agenda. We have come to that portion of the agenda which has one item, item 7.1 PD-32-19, 2019, January to March Building Permit Activity Report. Would any member of council like to remove this item from the consent agenda for discussion? Seeing none, we will require a mover for the motion to pass this item on the consent agenda. And the motion is council receive the 2019 first quarter building permit activity report. Do we have a mover? Councillor Timmers, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So now we start into the regular agenda, and I do have a request of council that we move item 8.4 to the front of the regular agenda, because many of these folks are probably waiting patiently for that particular item. So are we in agreement to move item 8.4 up in the agenda? Show of hands in favor? Thank you. Okay. So, we are now considering item 8.4 PD-36-19 zoning bylaw amendment application by Better Neighborhoods, Inc. Are there any questions from council with regards to this report? Seeing none? Oh, we do have questions. Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to planning, staff is recommending approval of this report. My concern is, what are the possibilities of having an LPAT or a OMB hearing with regards to this, should we go against the staff's approval?
Through you to, or over to you, Mark, or Matt, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's our opinion, I mean, when we bring forward an application and we recommend it for approval, reason being is, when we receive an application, we have to review it in terms of how it complies with provincial policy, regional policy, and local policy. We have to consider all of these things. As professional planners, we have to weigh the overall and how they comply with those policies, and in this case, we've concluded that they do. So, in my opinion, if this were not to be approved, I do feel like there would be a potential for an appeal, yes.
Okay, so, if I may, Chair.
Sure.
It's just, to take two backyards and then piggyback it onto a vacant lot, it can be construed, and it's not my position or business to say whether this is being crafty or whether it's being creative. My concern is that we are representing a town on a whole, not just a neighborhood, and this is what makes this difficult, extremely difficult decision for myself. So, in your estimation, could this development, should we not approve it in its current state, could we risk it coming back with an even more denser development, or something of a greater scale, given like a possible 3-story building? If I may, I think there's always that risk. I mean, we absolutely do not control the ownership of the property, and if we were to say no to this, the owner of the property has every right to sell the property and do whatever they want. And as was mentioned, the densities, are could possibly be higher. There's always that chance.
do you have, through you to Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in addition to that, I mean, I think, you know, when we talk about appeals, we talk about, you know, whether or not it conforms with policy. That's really what the barometer for something like that. And I mean, I would emphasize that when we do consider conformity with policy at all levels, I mean, I don't think there's any one development that 100% complies with every single line in a policy. I mean, I think it's hard. Policies are not meant for site-specific circumstances. A lot of the times, policies are implemented as a blanket approach. It is what it is. But we do try to maximize, you know, those policies that it does comply with. And in this case, when you look at the growth plan, when you look at the provincial policy statement, when it talks, you know, even the Greenbelt Act where it talks about focusing growth in urban areas, and then you look at how that's precipitated down into our official plan, and you look at something as what the density range is for this particular property, and they fall well within it. I mean, as a matter of fact, they're kind of at the low end of that density. So I don't necessarily think there's a threat per se that, you know, oh, well, should we not approve this? They're just going to come back with something more dense. But I think just the thought is that there could have been, or the property does lend itself to something that could be considered of a higher density. Okay. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you for your verbal feedback on that.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. You know, there's a lot of comments tonight around this whole application, and I'm struggling with it myself. I personally don't support it. I feel like there's just too many unanswered questions. We've got parking, there could be issues. Are we parking one car in the garage, one car on the street? Where's the snow going? We can't turn a fire truck around. Like, I have great concerns over this whole application. And the only thing that would make me feel better about all of it is if they had an exit or an entrance out onto Victoria Avenue. And I said that from the very beginning, and I stand by that. So I will not be supporting these recommendations tonight.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to Councillor Mikulak and Councillor Timmers, I've got a great deal of consternation about this project. I'm trying to create a divide between what my own personal feelings are about the aesthetics of it, which I don't think, or I do think they actually are quite nice in some of the design features of it, but I also think for that space and the way traffic is going to be flowing and the actual number of units there, I've got some hesitation. So I'm wondering if there's anything from some of the comments tonight or some of the points brought up from the public, if there's anything that the staff would reconsider with their recommendation or would like further information on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think from our standpoint, there have been a lot of things addressed that we would typically want to see addressed at this point. I mean, we've had traffic evaluated. I mean, and I think we need to keep in mind those volumes that were identified. That was, you know, at the peak hour specifically. Traffic coming and going is going to happen throughout the day. They're not all going to leave at exactly the same time or even the same hour. So I mean, things like that, they've already been considered at what I would consider a level that we typically consider these types of things. Services, we've confirmed that there is feasibility, there's capacity from a water and sanitary point of view. Drainage, there's been multiple options that we can further drill down on in detailed design, which again is something that we look for at this stage. When it comes to compatibility with existing development, I mean, I don't want to discredit anybody's input tonight. I mean, obviously everybody has a right to an opinion, but the applicant has also done things to try to address interface as much as possible, given that this is an infill development. And as I said, infill developments are something that we're going to be seeing more of. I mean, some of the provisions even that they've asked for a greatly reduced front yard setback to the private road. Reason being is they're trying to maximize a rear yard setback, so there's that as much of an interface as they can get with the existing community surrounding it. I mean, in terms of landscaping, that's something that we'll continue to work with them on during detailed design site plan too, but there's a variety of plantings that they've already looked at along the access way coming into the site, throughout the site, not only to dress it up, but also to try to add to that compatibility, add to that privacy aspect. And with respect to ownership, I mean, condominium, that's just a ownership model more or less. So all things considered, it's my opinion that a lot of the things that are left now are things that we would typically deal with at site plan. That's why staff's come forward with a recommendation for approval at this time, because we feel that from a standpoint of what we would typically look at from a zoning perspective, everything has been addressed, at least at a preliminary level that we can move forward with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Brunet. Kick yours off there, my mistake. Councillor Brunet, now you can go back in.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I just wanted to touch on the item that we heard from a number of the people that came to the microphone in terms of the landlocked component and the fact that this wouldn't be a walkable community and that one would have to travel east before they can go west, or west before they can go east, and north before they can go south. And on page 149 of the report, and unfortunately, I wasn't privy to some of the discussions that took place on this previous to tonight, but I'm just confused through you, Mr. Chair, maybe to the planning department on what discussion has actually taken place in terms of getting the developer to agree to facilitate a pedestrian connection to Victoria Avenue. So, you know, in the report, it says that they were not in agreement to do so at this time. I think, to me, this is an important point. We've heard it over and over and over again tonight, that there's a concern about, you know, active transportation. You know, we have a park in Rittenhouse. We have the 20 Valley School. You know, we want complete neighborhoods. We want complete streets. We continue to talk about this in our development. To me, it's an important point. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just would like the planning department, before we go to any further discussion on this, to see if there was any opportunity that this developer is willing to agree to a pedestrian connection to Victoria Avenue.
Matt.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. So definitely that's something that we worked with the applicant to consider. As a matter of fact, as a result of the public meeting, when those concerns were identified as well, we engaged the applicant in discussions. We actually instructed them to go back and specifically approach those property owners to the east to try to secure some type of access, some way onto Victoria. Unfortunately, the property owners there at this point are not amenable to that. We did also, there wasn't even sidewalks on the site initially at all. So, you know, in keeping with accessibility improvements, those have now been included. And I think you heard earlier that there's also potential for a connection into Rittenhouse Park. That's something we will certainly move towards as we go through site plan approval as well. It's just a matter of determining how that looks. But the potential is there. The applicant has certainly provided for that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, they have tried to make as many improvements as they can that's within their purview from an accessibility standpoint.
Thank you.
Councillor Patriviva.
Thanks, Chair McPherson. And I, like everyone else, and conflicted. I appreciate the input tonight because the neighbors are those that are directly affected by it. Couple questions. Did this not go to Committee of Adjustment with respect to the severance? And what was the outcome of that meeting?
Mr. Bruder.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So it did go to Committee of Adjustment, and the committee at that time decided to table it until the results of this particular zoning amendment.
Okay. And with respect to, we've heard it with respect to drainage and water control, we heard that that's going to come at site plan approval, but we saw a very innovative solution to a problem like this with the Prudence development, where water would be held in situ underneath tree canopies, growth canopies for that. Could that be something that we ask? And again, it's that unknown, and I get the fact that the neighborhood is looking for some reassurances. We're telling them it comes at site plan approval, but, I mean, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And the crunch point is the two properties on Victoria. If the development acquired those two properties, could the town not then advocate for an entrance onto Victoria using the same premises of active transportation, walkable community, ease to the U-Link we heard tonight? Because when you're measuring distances, and we go through this, you know, when school busing and that, we talk the crow flies. Unfortunately, humans aren't crows, and they don't have wings, they have feet. So they have to travel by a sidewalk or a path or a road. And I mean, at the very least, can we, you know, is there talk of using the dreaded E word, expropriation, to get what we want, to get an access, because these are the points of contention. And we heard it tonight. Is it prudent, or can we go about this some way to say, okay, we hear your concerns, we want to address them. Can we make this contingent upon the improvement to Rittenhouse? It seems to be a sense of dominoes here, that something needs to take place before the others to fall. And these are the biggest points of consternation, this infill development. And we need to get it right. And we can't hold off to a what if and a plan B and everything will be right, because, you know, there's the chance to do it, and the chance to do it is now. So just curious to those. That was probably a long, convoluted question. And there was a number of questions in there, but just looking for some direction.
Okay, Mr. Bruder, would you care to make comment to that?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So I think I'll address the drainage one first. I think you're talking about the option, you know, of use of some things like those Silva cells or something like that. And I mean, while it might be a viable option, that's a discussion we need to have with the applicant as well to see if they're willing. I'm not cognizant of what the costs are for something like that either. I don't know if it's cost prohibitive. But from a drainage standpoint, I didn't necessarily say that we're gonna wait until site plan to figure it out. What I've said is there is an ability for them to hold drainage onto the site to the satisfaction of our Public Works Department. We've already established that. Now, at site plan, maybe there's a better way that's identified to do that, but we've already identified from a feasibility standpoint that it can happen. With respect to the access out to Victoria, unfortunately, that was something that was brought up. It was brought up at pre-consultation when the applicant first came forward. First of all, there was some pretty, I'll call it vehement opposition from the region on that. They didn't want it. They were even reluctant when it came to pedestrian only. Hazy on the details as to why, but that's what the applicant was instructed at the time. I mean, the property owners that are beside the ones that we're speaking of, they are not interested in selling their properties at all. I mean, you mentioned expropriation. That's not typically a place where we'd want to take something like this, especially considering there is potential to provide a connection on the west side. Keep in mind, Rittenhouse Park does have a path going through there up to Rittenhouse as well. And I do get your point about dominoes and about the work that's going to be happening on Rittenhouse. But keep in mind what we said about where it's been moved in the schedule tentatively, and keep in mind also that this still needs to go through a site plan process as well. So it might not be all that far off in terms of how they meet up timing-wise. I mean, there will be a little bit of a lag, but...
And I appreciate your comments, Mr. Bruder, but, I mean, it goes back to the discussion we had earlier at 5 o'clock when we were talking about governance review. And, you know, who knows this area better than the local municipality? So, I mean, if you're told that you're not going to get an access, what's the point of pursuing the purchase of those properties? right? And this is where we talked about, is that planning needs to be put in the hands of the local municipality. It knows it better than anyone else. So, is there a question there?
Yeah, I don't.
A
think
little
so.
bit, but-
I don't think so.
Okay.
So, and we won't get into the government side of things here tonight. Counselor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Counselor Patcherever brought up a good point, that Committee of Adjustment deferred decision on the severance. So tonight, they actually don't have the severance yet. So what I'm wondering is, you know, is this premature? Like, if we approve, and then what? It still has to be approved by Committee of Adjustment as well? What if Committee of Adjustment turns it down? What's the plan then? I'm just putting that through to Mr. Bruder.
Mr. Bruder, please.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. So I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think the intent was, I mean, at the end of the day, there probably isn't the need, or maybe the applicant doesn't want to go forward with the severance if they can't achieve the zoning they're looking for as well. So I think there's that side of it and I think Committee of Adjustment's position was, you know, they want to see how this moves forward before making a decision on the severance, because the zoning amendment is obviously a critical piece. So, I mean, that's my understanding of why it was tabled.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, there being no further discussion, we have a motion. And the motion is that council approve zoning bylaw amendment application PLZ BA 201-80189 in the name of Better Neighborhoods, Inc., subject to the following condition: that an H holding provision be placed on the zoning of the lands, and that the H holding provision not be removed until the following conditions have been met. The applicant has entered into a site plan agreement, and the agreement has been registered on title, and the applicant has submitted the letter of credit and cash payments required by the agreement. And that council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix D of Planning and Development Department Report PD-36-19 to amend the zoning regulations for lands at 3978 Victoria Avenue, 3966 Victoria Avenue, and 3987 Azalea Crescent. And that council deem that zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan, excuse me, for the town of Lincoln. We will require a mover. Councilor Reimer? All in favor? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. That is carried. Council considered all of the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report, analysis, and recommendations, and finds that, subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. So we are now considering the first item on the regular agenda. Which is item number 8.1 PD-33-19 zoning bylaw amendment application by Richard and Sean Watson. Are there any questions from council with regards to this? Seeing none, we have a motion that council approve zoning bylaw amendment application PLZ ATU 201-80191 in the name of Richard and Sean Watson. That council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix B of Planning and Development Department Report PD-33-19 to amend the zoning regulations for lands at 4265 Jordan Road, subject to the following conditions. That the owner enter into a temporary use agreement with the town to ensure that the dwelling is converted back into a non-residential use upon expiry of the temporary use bylaw. That a cash deposit or letter of credit in the amount of $5,000 be submitted to the town to ensure that the above agreement is complied with, and that the temporary use bylaw not be presented to council until the conditions above have been complied with. And that council deem that zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln. We will require a mover for the motion, Councilor Pachariva. All in favor? And that is carried. Council considered all the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report, analysis, and recommendations, and finds that subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. We are now considering item 8.2, PD-34-19, zoning bylaw amendment application by Kelly and Benjamin Van Hoffen. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, we have a motion that council approve zoning bylaw amendment application PLZ BA 201-90013 in the name of Kelly and Benjamin Van Hoffen, and that council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix B of Planning and Development Department Report PD-34-19 to amend the zoning regulations for lands at 4226 Queen Street. And that council deem that zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln. We will require a mover for the motion. Councilor Timmers. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And council considered all of the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report, analysis, and recommendations, and finds that, subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. We are now considering item 8.3, PD-35-19, zoning bylaw amendment application by Kimberly and James Vermeyer. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, we have a motion. The council approves zoning bylaw amendment application PLZ AT U201-90014 in the name of Kimberly and James Vermeyer. And the council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix B of the Planning and Development Department Report PD-35-19 to amend the zoning regulations for lands at 2675 Red Maple Avenue, subject to the following conditions. That the owner enter into a temporary use agreement with the town to ensure that the dwelling is converted back into a non-residential use upon expiry of the temporary use bylaw, and that a cash deposit or letter of credit in the amount of $5,000 be submitted to the town to ensure that the above agreement is complied with, and that the temporary use bylaw not be presented to council until the conditions above have been complied with. And that council deem that zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln. We will require a mover for that motion, Councilor Brunet. All in favor? And that is unanimous and carried. Council considered all the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report, analysis, and recommendations, and finds that, subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. So we are now moving to item number 8.5 on the agenda. We are now considering 8.5 PD-37-19 amendment to the zoning bylaw public uses. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, we have a motion. that council approve zoning bylaw amendment application PLZ BA 201-90015, and that council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix A of Planning and Development Department Report PD-37-19 to amend Section 6 of the zoning bylaw, and that council deem that zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln. We will require a mover for the motion. Councilor Rajima, all in favor? And that is carried. Council considered all the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report analysis and recommendations and finds that, subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. We are now considering item 8.6 PD-38-19, proposed noise control bylaw and amendments to the fees and charges bylaw. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Just wondering, the point brought up by Mr. Breen this evening about the AGCO. So if someone is in contravention or has been cited, is there some way, shape, or form that we can get notification of that? Because I think that then makes further events, in my mind, suspect, only knowing my dealings with the AGCO. So if you've done something that you've been cited for, it's probably something substantial.
Dan, do you want to respond to that, please?
Yep, through you, Mr. Chairman. It's similar to police, where if they have an active investigation or if they've charges, sometimes it's hard to get that information because they're a different enforcement body. It doesn't mean that we can't ask. We can certainly ask, absolutely, and it's not part of the bylaw, or there's no wording in the bylaw prohibiting us from asking. More a procedural thing, so it's something that if that's what we're looking to do, we can certainly include that as an ask. I just caution there's difficulty in gaining some of that information from a municipality enforcement standpoint.
Okay, only because when one fills out a AGCO application, you need to notify the municipal clerk, you need to notify the building department, you need to notify the fire department. So it's almost like a reciprocal ask. So, you know, we're getting notification on those things. Now, this is where we go to them and say, okay, this is our ask to you. We expect to be notified. So just throwing it out there, there's a little bit of, there's some grounds for talking there. Okay, and then another aspect too with respect to the noise bylaw, and I look at comment earlier in the evening and when we talked about special events and tent bylaw. I attended a wedding last year, my cousin's wedding in Niagara Lake, and it was on it was at Kurt's Orchards. So farm setting, this is what we're talking about, but at 9:30, in order for the event to continue, everyone had headphones on. So the music actually played through the headphones, which I thought was fantastic. So the party continues without sound. Wondering if that's something, and this is best practice, this is out of the box thinking. Have we considered something like that? Because again, this is this touch point. So let's be innovative. Let's push the boundary and let's try something that's already out there. Let's contact Niagara Lake and say, how have you made out with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a DJ or is that a band?
No, it was a DJ.
Okay.
Yeah. Band would probably be a little bit more difficult, but if the technology's probably there.
Yeah. It's an idea.
Dan?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard of them as well. It's something I think that's generally, as of now, a decision for like a business owner or a party operator to incorporate into their party. Again, cautioning that with headphones on, you're still going to have them singing and yelling and all that kind of stuff, even though no one can hear them anyways. But there is still a chance that there's noise existing as it is. However, that is something that a business owner could look at, which would potentially lessen any noise effects going forward in situations like that.
Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick questions. One would be around enforcement. Again, I know we've talked about a little bit about how this has a little bit more teeth, but I take it from previous history with some issues, particularly around, I believe, Redstone. There was issues regarding enforcement and how a complaint would be handled. So just for the record, will there be spot checks by our bylaw department, and also will there be active complaint resolution?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, all that's going to be improved. So we're going to be able to staff better based on the new system that we have in place and with the exemption process that we're putting forward. When officers are scheduled and we know there's an event, they'll be on the road for the duration of what the noise exemption is and be available to respond. They'll also be doing spot checks or proactive drive-bys. They won't be sitting there the whole time. They'll have other things that they'll be doing as well, but that will be incorporated into the new system and it will be improved from our past practice.
Okay. One quick follow-up as well. On page 206, section 6.2BV, it says that a permit may be revoked if any condition is not being met. Just wondering why we're not saying a permit shall be revoked instead of may. Why are we giving leniency if they're if there's an infraction upon the bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Has a little bit to do with trying to gain compliance and working with somebody who has a permit. The officer will use discretion while they're there, or will use discretion in the office following the complaints if it wasn't dealt with on the road at the time. But it's incorporated to allow us some flexibility to work with them to gain compliance, so that we're not just going and making one decision at a time. We can see if we can gain some work with them most, really.
Okay, Mr. Bruder may have a comment here.
Yeah, just to dovetail on that, I think just further to what Dan said, it's also, when we had the consultation for this, we went through public consultation, there was also agency consultation, and we're trying to work with both sides here. I mean, if we included very stringent, strict wording like that, I mean, it doesn't allow for any, what if we've got some business operator that's in very good standing, they've had previous exemptions, all has been good, and then all of a sudden one little thing happens that maybe could be considered a violation. Nope, that's it, forget it. Like, I think this just gives us a little bit more flexibility that we could implement from a enforcement standpoint.
And Mr. Kirkopoulos would also like to make a comment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think just to dovetail a little bit onto the previous comments, and especially around enforcement, I think what made it tough before and what you see in this latest round of bylaws is the decibel piece. And I think what we had a difficult time last time enforcing is, I think, some general wording and general provisions that say if it causes an annoyance or if it causes a disturbance. I think one person's disturbance is another person's enjoyment. And I think oftentimes it was left to the officer, it was left to a conversation with the resident. And I think you can see how there's a difference of opinion in a number of cases, and I think we experienced that in very much real time. So the conversations we had were very much around adding that decibel piece so that we had something we could point to.
Okay, so we're now, sorry, we have a motion. That council enact and pass the proposed noise control bylaw number attached as Appendix A and an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw 2019-04 attached as Appendix B. And that council appoint the Committee of Adjustment as the hearing committee for noise exemptions appeals in accordance with bylaw number attached as Appendix A. We will require a mover for the motion. Councilor Rajima, all in favor? And that is carried. We are now considering item 8.7 PD-39-19, delegation of approval, condominiums, and extensions to draft approval. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, we have a motion that council delegate to the Director of Planning and Development the authority to approve plans of condominium, including the authority to approve an amendment to a condominium description. That council retain the approval authority for vacant land condominiums, and that council delegate to the Director of Planning and Development the authority to grant extensions to draft plan approval for plans of subdivision and plans of condominium. We will require a mover for the motion. Councilor Bernay, all in favor? Okay, it's unanimous, that is carried. So we are now at confidential items, which there are none. Staff remarks, do we have any further staff remarks? There are none. Do we have any committee remarks? No surprise, there are none. So we are adjourned.